My dad's best friend grew up in India and was always a cautious boy. The reason for this is because his parents consulted a seer to know their fate. The boy was told that he was destined to die young, by cause of water, and this fate was bound to his soul. In an attempt to circumvent this, the boy's parents had his name changed and ordered him to stay away from water of any form. They thought this had ultimately changed his soul, as names are a pretty big deal in Hinduism. My dad and he had some big plans, then to leave India during college for greener pastures. They left for Germany and later the States together. However, midway through college, my dad's friend had to return to India for a family affair. My dad proceeded to America alone and had a family. He then had a business trip back to India and thought, maybe I should visit my old friend. He went back and searched for his friend. The town elder said he died 20 years ago at the age of 22. The cause of death? Drowning, trying to save a child caught in a flood. I think the child survived, so his sacrifice wasn't in vain. I can't explain how the seer saw this or even could know. The seer saw that the boy would die both young at 20 and by water, both of which were correct. I want to believe it was mere coincidence, but there are way more stories like this that my parents have. People say it's just a coincidence, but story after story I begin to wonder, could the old religions really have been onto something? When I was younger, I was a smoker. I mean a pretty heavy one. At the time, my grandmother also smoked. It was either a few days before or after Christmas, because I remember the tree was up. My cousin lived down the street a few houses down from me, coincidentally. This was a night when he was sleeping over. We would get to play on the PlayStation, which would be a great night, or so we thought. My grandparents were both sleeping at this point, since it was pretty late. We both smoked, and my grandma smoked Sonoma Regular 100. They were her favorite brand before she quit. Well, my cousin and I had a brilliant idea to go upstairs while she was still asleep to nab ourselves a good old-fashioned cancer stick from her pack. We went up the stairs, being as quiet as mice. When we reached the door, I pushed for it to open. Of course I had to, as it was my house. Wonderful. I pushed the door open, trying to keep quiet. As soon as the door swung open, a black figure jumped at us. It was like a real-life horror movie jump scare. We loved them in the films, but this, no. It made us both nearly crap ourselves. We bolted back down the stairs, ignoring the idea to stay quiet at this point, and once we were in another room, away from the stairs altogether, we were both pale. We both saw it. It wasn't one of those times where one of us would see something. Whatever it was, it showed itself to both of us. That'll teach us to keep smoking and try and take a cigarette again. We dubbed what we saw that night the Christmas Demon. My father, at 55, is strictly against the whole concept of ghosts. Not a spiritual bone in him, he's a man of science. My mother, however, is spiritual in nature and believes heavily in the supernatural, and always has. There was a story I was told by my grandmother, on my mother's side when I was young, that my father had been too scared to tell anyone. When my brother was newborn, my mother took off one evening for important business, leaving my father in charge of my brother for the evening until she returned. Halfway through the evening, my brother started crying over the monitor, and my father got up to help him calm down. Only he hears him calm down on the monitor, and quiet hushing from a woman's voice. She begins singing, and my father is put at ease for a moment. But then he remembers my mum isn't home. He rushed to the bedroom to find a woman with long, red hair similar to my mother's, shushing the baby over the edge of the cradle. She's singing softly, similar to how my mother does. He is frozen in the doorway, unmoving, unable to protect his child from the presence of the stranger in his own house. She looks at him, and her face is shrouded in darkness, as if it's purposefully hidden from his vision. The baby is silent and breathing softly, clearly unharmed and alive, just calm. My father said she simply took off out the window. He checked on the baby and he was fine. My brother, now 20, was fine. He was unharmed, breathing perfectly and sleeping. My mother got home and my father recounted what happened to her. Of course, my mother assumed an ancestor or something had come to visit her child in her absence, but it was never explained. I asked my father about it when I got older, just to make sure it wasn't one of those tales your grandma tells you when you're young. Sure enough, he tensed up and started telling me that we don't have to talk about that night. Eventually, he confirmed my suspicions. It did happen. He still just isn't exactly sure what happened. I want to share with you today a story I call The Door to Hell. It happened in Portland, Oregon, 1994. But the story goes back way further than that. In the area of southeast Portland, just a hair south of Flavel Street and 52nd, there stood an old historic mansion. It had that semi-Addams Family vibe to it, and it was haunted as hell. Anyway, let me break you down some of the past. It was commissioned by a Union U.S. Civil War veteran. He had it built so his wife, son, and daughters could move in. He became the most prominent dog breeder in the area, and his wife made and sold dolls. Sometime along the way, the old soldier suffered a significant breakdown. He began to abuse and torment his wife and children. But the son got the worst of it. He would beat the boy senseless with his cane, and then lock him in the door to the hell cubbyhole. In the end, the butcher killed his wife, daughters, and then himself. His son had been locked inside that cubbyhole and eventually died to his injuries or starvation. Concerned businessmen were worried when the soldier hadn't come to some meetings of the local Chamber of Commerce, so they sent out some people to investigate, when they found a horror show. From 1875 until 1974, the house jumped from owner to owner. All saw the customized large Dutch colonial mansion and wanted it for any number of reasons. All would at some point endure similar supernatural events there. And in 1974, the final owners turned the house over to the local historic society. In 1994, my friend Nick's family bought it from the historical society for quite a steal. When my friends first moved in, we would hear the sounds of dogs barking, yipping and whining in the basement. However, they didn't own a dog. Lights would constantly turn on behind you or off when you walked into a room. Faucets would turn on by themselves, and random objects in locked rooms wouldn't be there where they were left. On many occasions, my friend's family and I would swear we would hear the grandfather clock chime 13 times at 6:30 in the morning. Many of us felt what could be described as a gentle touch, like a family member placing their hand or shoulders. It had weight and pressure, and we would turn to find no one there. This was made even worse when one of us had our back to the wall. There was one occasion when my friend, his older brother and I witnessed what we would later believe to be the ghost of the original owner. This happened when we saw a man ascend the staircase beside me as I went downstairs to use the bathroom, but there were no elderly men in this house, which leaves one to speculate who it could have been. There were also several times when driving up the long driveway, a dark figure would be watching people driving up the house in the third-story window on the north side. Almost every time this happened, no one was home. The eldest daughter complained constantly. She'd at random times in her room hear the sound of someone behind her, sniffing her hair. She would turn, but be alone in the room. Furthermore, she constantly had her door locked due to her brothers constantly bugging her. Twice while watching movies in the living room, we all heard the loud and heavy noise of something moving across the wooden floor of the second floor. Somehow, a near 200-pound wooden bed and frame had moved almost 9 feet across the room without disturbing the contents of the bed. In my opinion, the second scariest thing happened one night while playing D&D in the living room. At one point, Clarissa, the second oldest daughter of my friend's family, got up to do a mild bit of body acting for a scene. She moved to the bay window and placed her hands on the little seat there. Her character was building up to some sort of loud outburst. She screams to the effect of, "Lord Cravington, I've had enough of you," without warning, when 3 very loud, very sharp bangs come from the window, as if someone was beating their fist on the other side. Seeing it was still light out, we could see there was no one there. This was followed by a voice screaming from the 3rd floor, "Keep it down, you rotten girl." That made us all nope the hell out of there for the night. Finally, there was the door to hell incident. In that 3rd-story suite, we discovered there was a hidden door in the wall. It was a hideaway closet. Behind that door was a second and smaller door. The moment we all discovered it, we were overcome with this utterly massive sensation of dread. We opened it. Inside was a smallish crawl space. The inner walls of the space were covered with claw-like marks as if made with human fingernails. There were darker stains in the wood when we washed it out to get a better look. On the inside of door 2 were weakly carved words that read, "This is the door to hell." To this day, I and anyone there that day constantly have this door appear in our dreams. It appears randomly. Like, imagine you're walking into a classroom of your high school. You open the door in your dream, but instead of your classroom, it's that 3rd-story suite with the door to hell. Each time you see it, you're progressively closer than the last, and a feeling of predatory desire washes over you, like you're the prey. After this, my friend's family decided it would be best to get a Catholic priest, as they were Catholic, to attempt to cleanse the house. But from what I remember, it wasn't successful. And the family wasn't in a financial position to move out for quite a while. They finally got a chance to move out, and shortly after, the house wound up being demolished in the year 2000. The Historical Society had deemed the house to be too dangerous to preserve and too expensive. The repairs needed were excessively expensive, so they deemed it best to demolish it. The lot can be viewed on Google Maps today. From the supernatural and paranormal perspective, the door to hell was studied a few times. The first was around 1927, when they reported more poltergeist-like activities, stating things did turn off and on, doors slammed on their own, and stomping footsteps could be heard. In 1954, some students from OSU went to check it out for themselves, and they reported much of the same. The last and final inspection came around in 1997, when Nick's family asked a group of Portland-based ghost hunters to check it out. They reported some of the more severe events, which included the ghost touches and sense of abject dread from even looking towards the door. I'm glad it's no longer there, and feel great sorrow for the family who suffered at the hands of that crazed man in that tainted location. My father-in-law hunts on my family's lake house. He had been going to summer camp on Lake Winnipesaukee since he was a little kid. Every summer, same camp. Him and his brothers his whole life. In the 80s, the camp closed down and then sold off as lots on the island where the camp was to former campers. My father-in-law bought one of the properties and started bringing his own children there every summer. Fast forward 30 years, I marry his eldest daughter and start going up to the lake every weekend with my wife and her family. Unfortunately, after a few years of this, my father-in-law succumbed to leukemia and was no longer with us. Or so everyone thought. Every summer since he had passed, I have had at least one unexplainable incident happen to me up at the lake house. It usually happens the weekends we open up our lake house for the summer, or the weekend that we close down for the winter. There is often an incident when we have a lot of family come for visits too. The first time I noticed something was amiss was the first summer we opened camp after he'd passed away. As I am the eldest male in the family now, it's typically my job to do all the heavy lifting. I was unloading our boatload of supplies on the dock with a little wagon that I used to haul all of my wife's stuff from the boat to the house. I carefully stacked all of our stuff in a pyramid-like shape so that when I pulled the wagon, nothing would wiggle loose and fall off. After 3 trips from the boat to the wagon, I had just one bag left in the boat to grab. As I turned back towards the wagon with the final bag, I froze in my tracks. A brand new rug still rolled up and in plastic wrap that I had buried in our bags on the wagon, so it wouldn't roll off, was now out from under all the stuff I'd piled on top of it and was leaning at a 45-degree angle on the side of the cart, just sitting up in the air. Not anything close to how I'd left it, right there and in front of me. My blood ran cold. As I pulled the wagon towards our house, I called out to my wife, "Your dad says hello." The following day, when I was alone in my brother-in-law's little shack, I was busy setting up furniture and making beds, getting our camp ready for visitors. Suddenly an acorn struck me in the back of the head, and then tumbled to the ground. I looked up, wondering if a rodent or something scurried by and knocked it onto me, but there was nothing but the open pitch of the roof above my head. He said hello again, and I ran out of there. The next summer we had a little family reunion of sorts, and my wife's cousins and all their kids came to spend the weekend with us at the lake. One afternoon, I was out back behind the house grilling some lunch for everyone. Everyone else was down at the beach or playing in the water. As I walked through the back door, a balled-up Pikachu bathrobe came flying down the stairs and hit me in the face. In a fury, I pulled the robe off my face and stormed up the stairs, intent on giving whoever did this a good talking to. But there was no one. There was no one else in the house but me. Nobody believed me when I told them what happened. The following summer, when my wife started to believe it, for some reason my wife had been digging around under our cabin, where her mum and dad used to stay before we built the main house, and she found an old set of wrenches that had sunken down in the dirt under the house, probably after many rainstorms. She was washing the old tools off in the sink, and when I came into the kitchen and scoffed, explaining that you don't use water to wash metal tools, you should use WD-40 or something, she told me I didn't know what I was talking about, and to that I respond, "If your father were here, he'd tell you the same thing." To which my wife said, "No, he wouldn't," very confidently. Suddenly a bar stool that was positioned between my wife and I jumped and moved an inch. It didn't slide across the floor or anything, but it certainly hopped slightly. It was noticeable and made a pretty loud thud. My wife and I were both startled, and I said, "See? I told you your dad agrees." From that day on, she stopped questioning me about my encounters with her father. Roughly 15 to 17 years ago, when my sister and I were little kids, my sister got one of those cheap little disposable instant film cameras that are often given as prizes at Chuck E. Cheese. She was taking tons of photos around the house and took one of our dog, Chewy, outside, sitting directly behind the glass door. When the photo was spit out, immediately we saw something that we were not expecting. This. Over the years I've researched possible explanations to explain the photo, but to this day nothing makes sense. It was an instant disposable film camera. None of us had ever seen that woman, and there was no other woman in the house at the time. I'm naturally a skeptical person, but I still can't place a reasonable explanation on the photo. The camera was brand new and sealed when we got there, so realistically there's no way anyone else's image could have gone projected onto our photo. For all these years we have tried to make sense of it, and whom the woman was. Her stare is directly into the camera. It's so powerful, and her necklace is ornate. My mum always said that she looked like a Native American woman and points to the uneven beads on her necklace. We live in Southern California, and particularly in an area with rich Native American history associated with the land dating back hundreds of years, so it does make some sense. My mum always kept the tiny little photo and rarely told anyone about it because to her it was very special. A few years ago though, her car was broken into while hiking and her purse was stolen, which had always contained the photo, so unfortunately the original was lost. But the question remains, who or what is this woman, and is there a realistic explanation for this woman stranger to appear on our instant film camera? Any and all opinions and feedback would be greatly appreciated to unravel this mystery. My house was originally a tiny 2-bedroom bungalow, and my neighborhood started as a vacation and retirement community. It still is a retirement community. Our joking slogan is newlywed or newly dead, since people often move here to raise their young families. In fact, raising a family is exactly why my parents bought a home here. They came to visit my mum's college friend and fell in love with the cozy, flourishing yet quiet neighborhood. As it so happened, our house was for sale at the time and they started looking at it, and it was within their price range. Before they even had their first daughter, me, my mum saw the other neighborhood kids loved the big old chestnut tree in front of the neighbor's boulevard. So when the person living there wanted to cut the tree down, she tipped off City Hall, who told the neighbor they could not cut down the tree as it was on city land. I know this might seem like a lot of detail, but I think it's important to set the scene. Until we renovated, everything was perfectly normal. Not a hint of anything paranormal whatsoever. And then, when we did the first round of renovation, still nothing. In fact, there's really only one specific instance, right after the second round. We added a second level that consisted of a sitting room, 2 bedrooms for my sister and I, and a washroom. Now this part is important. The top of the stairs and the washroom door line up nearly perfectly, so you can see really clearly from the other point. The washroom had a big bathtub that had a removable shower head. My sister was using the shower head to wash her hair, and so was leaning over the tub. As she was rinsing, she looked between her side and arm, out the door. On the landing of the stairs, she saw what appeared to be a person in a trench coat. Startled and panicked, she stood up and then spun around to see nothing. The landing was empty. Being young, she ran to our mum's room, and years later, when we asked her about it, she'd completely forgotten. Years later, I was working at a pet food store for a fundraiser, and we bought in a medium whose strength was animal communication. I figured I'd have my dog read, even if it was just for fun. Besides, it went to a good cause. My dog is a pretty anxious dog overall, but she'd been doing one thing in particular that kind of weirded us out. She'd stare up at the landing on the stairs, cower and back away like she was afraid of something, so I asked the medium about that. She told me my dog was seeing someone on the stairs, something that appeared to be wearing a long garment like a cloak or trench coat. Honestly though, I thought it's probably just a previous owner or occupant in the house coming to see why it's changed so much. I don't think they mean any harm, my dog is just an anxious mess, but she's my anxious mess, so I burned some dragon's blood incense and politely explained to whoever was there this is our house now, although they were free to stick around if they wanted, just so long as they didn't scare my dog anymore. I think it worked, because my new dog now loves to sleep on the landing at night. When I was 15, my best friend left the country for a year and left me a key to her house. That was fantastic news, as I would use the key to let myself into her house when me and my boyfriend were, in quotation marks, at the movies, and we would just hang out there and chill. Strange stuff would happen there. In the past, we heard water faucets open and whatnot, but being a big and old house in a third world country, we shrugged it off. Until one night. We were in what was my friend's bedroom when we heard someone at the door. Right off the bat, me and the boyfriend think it's my mum who followed us and that we're gonna get in trouble. We look out the window and notice there's no car or anything outside, and ask each other if by any chance one of us didn't lock it behind us. This is happening really fast and we're both starting to freak out. Could there be a burglar? Or worse, my mum on the other side. The door handle is being jiggled and it seems like someone is trying to crank the door open, and my boyfriend and I agree to just open the door and push through and run outside non-stop. The door opened outwardly, so we thought if we pushed hard enough, we would mess up whoever was on the other side. Well, while the jiggling was happening, he unlocked the door and we both pushed the door open. It slammed. We ran and got into his car. While we were running down the stairs, I looked back and saw the door open and no one there. While we were freaking out and driving away, I bring this up and he says he also saw the door open and heard how it slammed against the wall. This was over 17 years ago. Whenever we tell this story, we call each other as proof that it happened because it was unexplainable. We obviously never went back. Funny thing is that a month or so later, my friend's dad came to the house for a few months and had to call a priest apparently because he kept hearing footsteps and the jiggling of the door. My parents bought a house built in 1848, Ontario, Canada. I was retrofitting a cabinet built into the wall to accommodate a safe and accidentally uncovered a sealed-up hallway and room. 2 years earlier, my parents had tried to insulate the exterior walls by blowing in fiberglass insulation from the outside. They couldn't figure out why they kept running out of insulation. Well, the hallway had about 3 feet of insulation on it, and it had also spilled into the spare room. Sitting neatly on top of the blown-in insulation was a saucer and a teacup, set as though tea may be in it. It was totally empty though. No insulation ever got in. We took pictures and discovered tons of orbs and some plasma-looking images that looked almost like a winged creature. Seriously strange. I used to work at a thrift store for about 3 years, and by that point, I was used to creepy and paranormal things happening, since the majority of the items we'd get in belonged to the recently deceased. Let me give you a small layout of what the store looked like. Our store was pretty large, and there were technically 3 sections to it. The first was the entrance of the store, which consisted of clothing, linens, knickknacks, kitchenware and shoes, and we also had a hallway that led to the second half of the store. This section had wall decor, a library room, bathroom item sections, and an electronics room. Lastly, the third section of the entire building was what we called the warehouse. At the entrance of the warehouse were our lockers and the manager's office to the right, then the electronics testing area and the sorting and pricing table to the left. The rest of the warehouse was very large and had tons of giant cardboard boxes called gaylords. These cardboard boxes are about 4 to 5 feet tall and have various sorted items inside of them. They were all aligned to the right side of the warehouse in 4 rows. We kept those to the side because they usually had holiday items we'd use for later for big events. We'd also make pathways large enough to get to them and into them if need be. Located at the very, very far back of the corner were the boxes full of clothing, which we called the clothing area. There we would sort through the clothes and hang them on racks. Then we dragged them to the first section of the store and put the clothes on the sales floor. Now, for the story. I was closing with my other co-worker, and it was just the 2 of us. That night I remember it was winter, so even though it was only around 6 p.m, outside it already looked like midnight. My co-worker had asked me to put away all the clothes on the rack and then place the rack by the clothing area in the warehouse when I was done. We only had 1 customer in the store at the time, and the lady was browsing through things in the electronics section, and my co-worker was up front taking care of the register for me while I went to put away the empty rack. I walked down the hallway and entered the back of the store to the warehouse. I only turned on one of the lights, which brightened the clothing area and left the rest of the warehouse dimly lit. I didn't notice anything at first and carried on dragging this tall metal and noisy rack back to the corner of the warehouse. When I finally reached the clothes area and turned around, I heard a low wheezing sound, almost like a witchy growl, or someone silently trying to clear their airway. I stood there frozen and creeped out by the noise, and thought maybe it was my co-worker trying to scare me. I even remember speaking towards the area the sound had come from, calling out my co-worker's name. "Hello? Shannon?" No answer. I ignored it after a few seconds of standing there and began to walk steadily back towards the entrance of the warehouse. That's when I saw a short black shadow in my peripheral vision towards the row of boxes that were 2 or 3 feet away. I didn't stop walking, but I did turn my head towards the shadow and my heart dropped to my stomach. I saw a black 5-foot hunched over spirit following alongside me. It creepily limped and kept up with my speed, going past every box. It looked like an injured old lady with a broken foot and horrid posture. I remember at this point I slightly began to run and kept my eyes on the spirit, hoping she wouldn't come towards us. She just kept limping and yet running alongside me until she went through the glass window and into my manager's office, vanishing completely. Panicked and afraid, I ran to my coworker, and just one look at me she knew I had seen something horrifying. I told her everything, and she immediately believed me without hesitation. We both politely kicked the customer out early and closed the registers early too. My coworker had been working at the thrift store for a few years and knew that items we get sometimes come with a little extra. She too has experienced many strange and frightening things while working there, but she had never heard of someone seeing a full-body apparition like the one I saw. A few days later, Shannon tells my boss and a few other co-workers about my experience, and another co-worker, Rita, said she was closing the following night after my experience and saw the same hunched-over spirit in the warehouse. Hearing this gave me goosebumps. I was on holiday staying at my sister's old house. We were having a coffee and talking, catching up, because we hadn't seen each other in a while. She told me that her and her partner, now ex-partner, had both recently seen a dark figure staring at them both through the window on the hallway door while they were watching TV. I noticed that the house was strange. I used to get a comfortable feeling at the house, but during this visit, something was different. I don't really know quite how to explain it, it just felt off and definitely different in some way. Their flatmate's room was always freezing, regardless of how hot it was outside. I had a nightmare one night. That woke me up. Something was whispering, "Albert," or something along those lines, and I felt as though I were possessed and had no control over my body. I started walking from the spare room into the hallway towards the lounge in this state. The closer I got, the weirder I felt, when suddenly I awoke in a sweat trying to figure out what had just happened, since it felt so vivid and realistic, but I knew I was dreaming, and that it didn't happen really. It was just an odd dream. So, I thought there was maybe some kind of link, with the name I heard whispered. My cousin, who stayed for a night on the couch in the lounge, also had a strange dream about the same time as me. She was sleeping on the couch and started levitating into the air above the couch and suddenly dropped. She explained, it's kinda like those dreams where you are falling and suddenly wake up before you hit the ground. Sometimes, when you walk to the toilet or kitchen in the morning, you would hear footsteps behind you or feel a tap on your back. I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me at first until I decided to start doing tests. I'd wake up, walk into the kitchen, and as soon as I'd hear extra footsteps, I'd suddenly come to a halt and stop moving just to hear the steps continuing behind me. The only times any of us recall this happening is when one of us was alone, and usually in the early morning. We had told my aunt about everything going on at the house, so she was interested and wanted to come and see for herself. She was walking around the house, looking and listening out for anything strange. She went into the flatmate's room, the one that was always very cold. It was calm, and nothing was out of the ordinary. But as soon as she entered the room, a set of drawers next to the wall by the door suddenly slid in front of the doorway, as if to prevent her from entering. I don't know how heavy they were, but judging by the size, it would have probably taken a decent amount of effort to push across the floor like that. She stepped back from the doorway, and things started being thrown across the room into the walls by themselves. I saw books and lamps fly across the room, and then the door slammed shut. and we could still hear things breaking and being thrown around, but when my aunt opened the door again, everything stopped. I don't necessarily believe in ghosts nor the paranormal with complete certainty, and I'm still on the bandwagon. But I think most occurrences have completely rational explanations behind them. But I have seen some very odd things in my life that I have trouble wrapping my head around, this being one of them.
When I was a child, I awoke to see the outline of a figure standing with their back to my bed. I thought it was my mother putting clothes away in my brother's dresser. I looked over to my brother, who was sound asleep. I called out to who I thought was my mum. As I peeked over the blanket, the figure looked over their shoulder when I spoke. They turned towards the door and walked out of the room. I sat up quickly because there was sound, and I realized that the door was closed. It had never been opened. The figure walked through the closed door. They say I was dreaming, but I know that I was awake the entire time. My father confirmed years later that he believed in the ghost of my grandfather and how he haunted our house. It's not in a bad way. My nana sold the house to my mother and father when they got married. My father told me that he had been working in his woodshop in the basement, running a chore shop, when he heard someone call out his name. He removed his eye and ear protector and saw no one there. He returned to work and it happened again a second time. He thought it may have been a neighbor yelling outside. He listened for a moment and then returned to his work. When he started up the saw for the third time, he said he felt a hand touch his shoulder and heard his name clear as day. He said when he swings around, the bulb in the pull chain at the swing of the base of the stairs went out and was swinging like it had been pulled. He proceeded to check the entire house, gripping a ball-peen hammer. No one was home. No neighbors were outside either. And he was completely alone. I would have been about a year old. I was asleep in the nursery, and my parents were awake in bed talking before going to sleep, when all of a sudden they heard an adult voice loudly go, "Shh," from the nursery. They both bolted up out of bed and rushed into the nursery to find me awake, but thankfully alone. They never told anyone because who would believe it? There was also an incident with my ma around that time. My dad had gotten up at around 5 a.m. to go to work, and she was in bed, deciding whether to get up or sleep a bit more. She decided to get up, and as she stepped out of bed, someone reached out from under the bed and grabbed her foot hard. She immediately pulled herself back up on the bed and was frozen there in fear for some time, waiting for someone to speak or make the bed move, or start crawling out from under. Eventually, she flew out the door, grabbed me, and then a weapon. But when she worked up the courage to go back to their room and look, of course there was no one there. Again, my parents never told anyone, because it sounds crazy. I tend not to believe in ghosts or spirits, but the stories really freaked me out. My fiancée at the time, now wife, worked at this naturopathic medical clinic in an old farmhouse converted to a doctor's office. The house was built in 1890, or close to that. Big place, full basement. The upstairs attic space was converted into a 2-bedroom apartment that she ended up renting from her boss. Now the place was known to all the staff to be haunted, though no one told me about it. After the fact, I heard all about seeing a little girl at the top of the old stairs all the time. The stairs were now capped, and what used to be the attic prior to it being the apartment. Even without that, the place had some creepy vibes. In the basement is the original 6-foot-wide, hand-dug well. Something super off about it. Even more creepy is there is a tunnel that goes from the basement to an old outbuilding about 30 meters away, right under the yard and all. Bad vibes down there all round. She and I each had dogs, and at this place and nowhere else they would avoid the kitchen and especially the pantry. When I say avoid, we fed them in the kitchen and they would strafe the walls, eat as fast as they could and then leave immediately. Normally my dog is right there in the kitchen, hoping to eat some people food, but not here,
At night, every night between about midnight and 3 a.m., it would smell like a combination of burning garbage and rot. If you went outside, the smell would fade within about 10 feet of the structure. Electrical would fail in different parts of the place randomly, then mysteriously return. No breakers or anything tripped, or during an outage either. So my wife gets into an argument with her boss, who now expects her to be a full-time daycare provider for her toddler instead of a medical reception. They argue, she quits, and the doctor says he wants her out by the end of the month. My wife says she will be gone by the end of the week. The end of the week was like 3 days, so she packed up for 2 days and I rented a U-Haul, and Friday evening she, my buddy and I started loading the truck. I eventually sent her to my place to crash, and as she had to work her second job early in the morning, that left me and my buddy to finish moving. It was either full moon or close to. I doubt it has anything to do with this, but what happened was very strange. It was one of those nights where the moon was so bright it left shadows on everything, which is fairly rare and very cool when it happens. Around midnight we took a break and sat on the floor of the now vacant living room. The door outside was on the opposite wall from us, and there were 2 skinny windows on either side of the door, when something caught my eye, and I looked at the window in time to see a light move across it. I didn't say or do anything. My buddy all of a sudden says, "Did you see that?" I asked him what, and he says he saw a light go by in the right window. Outside the door is a deck with stairs going down, but directly across from the door are windows in a huge hedge. No way light came from there. So I say I saw it too, and let him know it was a reflection. I tell him to not freak out. He freaks the hell out anyway. We go back to moving stuff and he doesn't stop acting triggered over it. I tell him to ignore it or it'll get worse, as I lived in a mildly haunted place for a year as a kid, and know reacting is the wrong thing to do. He's on edge, and so far I'm as calm as a clam. My buddy freaks out and says he saw some old woman standing in the pantry as we're walking back inside. I didn't see anything. Still, he's really starting to lose it. Like at this point he's reluctant to even go back inside. We walk back down the steps and smoke a cigarette. He looks down at the ground and exclaims, "There is this little stump from a tree that someone cut down at some point, and it's literally oozing sap out of slow rivulets. The weirdest thing I've ever seen at the time. They are reflecting really well in the moonlight." We go back inside and we're almost done. I check the bedroom. All that's left in her daughter's room is a dresser and a Furby. I swear to God this Furby hasn't been used or turned on in 2 years, and sure as hell, as I'm about to pick it up, its eyes flutter open and it begins making Furby nonsense noises. At this point I'm not keeping my cool all that well, mostly because the entire time there has been this weird feeling building up. At first it was just kind of uncomfortable, but it kept building. At this point it was kind of dread. I didn't know how to explain it, it was just getting much worse more quickly than when it started. I began picking up the Furby nearest the window and threw it out onto the lawn. Go back to packing the truck. Now in a big hurry though. I feel as though something terrible is coming. Almost everything is in the truck now and it's 2:45 a.m. I'm standing in the back of the truck and he's tossing me stuff to stack. All of a sudden the thing that was coming wasn't coming anymore. It was here. He's facing the truck. I'm looking out the back and I see it. Whatever it was on the other side of the fence, but you could make it out through the gaps in the board. I jumped out of the truck yelling, "We're leaving right now." My buddy stops dumbfounded and asks, "Why?" I'm already almost in the cab when I yell out, "Get in the truck, Chris!" He turns around, looks behind him and sees it too. He sprints into the cab and we leave without even closing the back door. I didn't tell him what I'd seen, but what he said he saw was exactly the same as what I did. A big black shadow with like a bodybuilder body had eaten a cargo truck of steroids and was looking through the fence, and it sort of glowed in its eyes the way coals do. The next day I told the story to my wife, and she let me know that everyone knew it was haunted, and she had seen the lights in the window before too, which is why she said she got curtains to cover them. She said her daughter had been bothered by them the whole time she was there. She talked to me into going back for the patio furniture, though I didn't want to.
We pulled up and I swear to God, you could see something pacing in the flower bed in front of the fence. Well, you couldn't see it, just the footprints it was making, and I told her, no, not doing that, get back in the truck, we'll buy you new patio stuff. We drove off, and after a few minutes, I saw it too. I never set foot on the property again, and never will. I can't explain the feeling. When I say dread, that doesn't cover it. The feeling that night wasn't fear of death or some horror. It was something way worse than dying, if that makes sense. Everyone can say this stupid made-up horror stuff, but this isn't it. I believed in ghosts because I had seen them as a kid, and whatever was waiting for us behind that fence was no ghost. I don't know what it was, and honestly, I hope to never find out. My story starts when I was 11 years old, and an only child, living with both my mum and dad. We lived in a 2-story farmhouse that was built around 1900, and my father still resides there to this day. He was a police officer for a small city located about 12 miles from our home, and worked the midnight shift as a shift sergeant. So at night it was just me and my mum there. The house is out in the country, and surrounded by nothing but fields and pastures. So as a child I spent a lot of time in the fields and woods, playing in the barns we had. My mother was a stay-at-home mother. The house was heated by a Franklin wood stove, the kind that has the doors that open in front and fold up as you open it. It was located in what we called the middle of the room. The downstairs consisted of a large kitchen, a large middle room, and then a big living room. Directly above the wood stove in the ceiling is a metal grate that's about 1.5 feet by 1.5 feet. This is to allow the heat rising off the stove to go upstairs. My parents' room was directly above the middle room, and their bed was right next to the metal grate in their floor. My room was right off theirs. The stairway was located in my room, and the wall that the stairs came up to was completely open, exposing the stairway with a banister to keep me from falling over down the stairs. The incident took place one night in early fall. Dad was at work, so it was just me and my mum at home. Sometime in the middle of the night, I was awoken to the sound of the fireplace poker striking the wood stove, and it sounded as if someone was stirring the fire and not being quiet about it at all. My first thought was, why the heck is she building a fire? It's hot here already. After probably another 30 seconds of banging, I heard my mother call out my name. The only thing was, she was calling my name from her room. When she called out my name, the banging stopped, and I responded back with, "Yes? What are you doing, son?" "I'm not doing anything, I'm in bed." "Then who's doing that?" she asked. I told her I didn't know. I thought it was her. So I got up a little scared. My thought was that someone had broken into the house. My mum grabbed the .38 S&W she kept in her nightstand, and we go downstairs. When we get to the room, the doors are wide open on the stove, and the poker is laying in the stove. We searched the entire house and checked all the doors and windows, but nothing. Mum checked to make sure there was no bird in the chimney. Nope, all good there. So we close up the stove, place the poker back under the stove, and go back upstairs to our respective beds. No sooner than we get in bed, and it starts again. Only this time it's much louder than before. I get up and go to their room. My mum is laying in bed, looking over the edge at the grate, and looking down at the stove. When I looked too, I was blown away. There, in the light of the kitchen light, you could see the doors were open again and the poker was slamming around all over the place on the stove, but there was no one holding it. My mum yelled out, "Who's there?" and the poker fell to the floor. Again, we go downstairs and check everything. It was all as we left it. The stove doors were open again, the poker laying on the floor in front of the stove, and we still talk about it to this day. I never saw anything else, and that never happened again, but after that, I would hear the stairs creak slowly in the night, as if someone was slowly walking up them. And even today, it feels like you're being watched in that house. In later years, I discovered that when my dad bought the house, he got it for a very good price. The former owners, an elderly couple, had lived there their entire married life, and when the last one died, it stood empty for a long time after it was a rental, and no one stayed. It was found that their only son, a Vietnam veteran, and after coming home developed many issues, until one day he went down to the cellar
and took his own life with a rifle. Very sad ending. Still today, that place gives me the creeps big time. There's a dark energy there, and I always hated the cellar. That was when I was a kid, and I didn't even know what happened. It just felt evil, and like there were eyes on you. It was the beginning of a journey into the unknown for me. Even though it was years before the other things began to happen around me, that night still gives me chills big time just remembering it. About 2 years ago, a co-worker committed suicide. Shortly after his death, I cleaned out his workstation. I boxed up everything and delegated files to others, and turned off his computer. His cubicle sat empty for months, maybe almost a year. One day, I needed to see if he had a copy of an invoice or something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I thought there was a small chance he may have scanned it and saved it on his desktop. I switched on his computer and was looking for the file, and just as I was about to shut it down again, I heard a scream from downstairs. A lady in our office received an instant message from the computer I was at. Now, I didn't open up the Skype or Teams app on his desktop. I just turned the computer on and looked in the documents and desktop for what I was looking for, and didn't find it, so shut it down. The IM she received was weird too. The message didn't have anything in it, just a blank pop-up. No one else received any messages from his computer. Lastly, whenever someone leaves our company, I usually reset all passwords, so since this app is attached to his 365 account, he would have asked me to update the password instead of just opening the app. Also, we knew he didn't leave a note before taking his life. Maybe he just wanted to reach out. She was sleeping on the couch and started levitating into the air. This almost happened to my sister. She was at the bar with her girlfriend, who ended up ditching her at the bar for someone else. At this point, she's already super drunk, but because she was just ditched by her girlfriend, she decided to take a few more shots. The bartender kicks her out because she is becoming sloppy and blackout drunk. It's the dead of winter, and this is before everyone had cell phones, so she starts to walk. But it's snowing and icy, and all she has for warmth is a thin coat. She keeps falling and landing in a ditch. Eventually she just laid there and closed her eyes and started falling asleep. She told me that she was startled awake by someone yelling, "Wake up!" but she didn't see anyone around. Almost blackout drunk and covered in snow, she made it the 2 miles home. She woke up in the entryway of her house soaking wet. I don't really believe in supernatural stuff really, but she thinks someone was watching out for her that night, or suddenly slid in front of the doorway as if to prevent her from entering. I don't know how heavy they were, but judging by the size, it would have probably taken a decent amount of effort to push across the floor like that. She stepped back from the doorway, and things started being thrown across the room into the walls by themselves. I saw books and lamps fly across the room, and then the door slammed shut, and we could still hear things breaking and being thrown around, but when my aunt opened the door again, everything stopped. I don't necessarily believe in ghosts nor the paranormal with complete certainty, and I'm still on the bandwagon. But I think most occurrences have completely rational explanations behind them. But I have seen some very odd things in my life that I have trouble wrapping my head around, this being one of them.
Let me take you back to a rainy night in March of 2022. I work as the Dean of Criminology and Security Supervisor in one old college in Baguio City, Philippines. While waiting, I decided to scan our classroom on the ground floor of the gymnasium to let time pass as I waited for the rain to stop so that I could leave and go home. It was around 10 p.m. and all employees had gone. All that remained was I and 2 security guards posted in the main gate, the other at the guard post near the college's ground. I went to one of our rooms, designated as a crime laboratory, serving as a classroom and a literal laboratory for forensic activities, and decided to do a little cleaning and equipment inspection, as our criminology students rarely clean their space when they leave the room. As I was cleaning, I heard a loud bang, as if there was an explosion or gunshot in the rear section of the room where the cubicles for forensics were located. Following the loud bang was a weird yet familiar smell. I felt my heart rate spike up. The smell was burned human flesh. I'm sure of it, since I served in morgues when I was a criminology intern in 2015, tending to various people post-mortem. I was certain of my assessment. It was at that moment with haste that I switched off the lights, locked the doors of the crime laboratory, and briskly walked to my office. I told myself, the hell with this, I'm not going to check out what it is. I remember the stories shared with me by tenured employees. They go as follows. As the building was being constructed, where the college is now built, construction workers would often come across bayonets, helmet, ammunition, landmines, and even human remains. You see, our college stood on land garrisoned by Japanese soldiers in World War II, just like most of the sites and structures in our city. Who knows what atrocities could have been committed on this land, and how many lives were lost as a result, and how many restless souls still wander the area. It's best not to find out. It's really disturbing to be with someone one day, and the next day, they're dead. When in this case, the lines fall along the same terms with me and my father. To begin, my dad had a long-term childhood friend that he grew up with throughout all his young, juvenile years. Their bond was very unbreakable to the fact that an argument was very unlikely between the both of them, but over the course of years, as both matured and began to have children, it was very, very common that I would look at my father's friend as an uncle. So to me, my father's friend was Uncle Paxton. I could roughly recollect a lot about him, but not a full description of what he used to look like since he passed when I was around 5. The best memory I can remember of him was the day right before he died. It was just a standard day compared to others when Uncle Paxton would be around hanging at the house, but from my father's recollection, he had made a money-betted game that was supposed to take place 2 days after he passed. The game they had betted on was Madden 09, but due to Uncle Paxton's death, the game couldn't be carried on. And as for my father, well, let's just say he didn't take it so easily the first few weeks after he was gone. But very soon my father began to accept the fact that his long-term friend or brother was gone. It's a tough pill to swallow, but what else may life have held for us individuals? The least we can do at times like this is grieve and then move on. Well, that wasn't the case for my father. The paranormal sightings for my dad regarding Uncle Paxton didn't begin until months after his passing. My dad normally kept things like this to himself, never revealing anything to a single soul, but the sightings for him started so seldom to more and more frequently as time progressed. My father would recall sightings at various functions, to other sightings like the gas station or in his dreams, the store, and he even saw him through the rearview mirror in the back seat of his car. This being the reason for how my father nearly veered into another lane, almost causing a wreckage, but he caught composure, and just as Uncle Paxton's apparition, vanished in an instant. He said that every time he saw him it was in silence. He was never trying to relay a message to him through his hands or anything else. He was just silent with a blank expression. There were countless times when my father would be around me, and times I would stare up at him and he would be in shock. I'd often pull on his pant leg to bug him about my necessities or other such things a kid may have asked or wanted, but even I would be in a sort of blow seeing my father so shocked and tranced off into a dead space. It didn't make sense to me until now, since my father has told me this story. The sightings for him have gotten so out of control to where my dad has begun to lose sleep. This carried on for about a year until my dad decided to seek help. He didn't get assistance from anyone he knew, since he still wanted to keep it from people. But I forgot what type of person he got help from. My father never really considered stuff like this,
being so petrified he wanted to try anything to cease what he was undergoing at the moment. So somehow, he managed to get in contact with this woman, who claimed to help those with experiences dealing with the paranormal. And the following week or so, he seeks help from the woman and tells her his story about him and his friend. One of the initial things she asks is there some type of event or occurrence that was supposed to take place before his passing? It took my father a moment to think, and then it clicked. The last thing they were supposed to do was play Madden together one last time, but Uncle Paxton died before he could even get the chance. The woman then replied with, "Sometimes those who are dead cannot proceed into the afterworld because there is something on this side holding them back." She then proceeded to tell my father that if he wanted the sightings to end, then he would have to finish and seek the task that's keeping Uncle Paxton held in my father's life. The last tip she left with was wait until everyone in the house was gone, turn off all the lights, shut the curtains, light a candle, and proceed to turn on the console. And the following day after my dad returned home, he did just that after dropping me off at school that morning. He said he followed every step the woman had recounted to him before turning on the console. And I kid you not, as soon as he did so, the door that we had to the attic connecting to the dining room burst open, and right after that my dad recalled feeling a gust of wind blowing past him. As the Madden game started, my dad said he began playing with who he believed to be his deceased friend. He had both remotes connected, and although the other remote never moved out of its place where he'd left it, the screen showed otherwise. During this experience, my father recalls being more dejected than spooked, but said that at the end he felt a huge wave of relief hit him, and after that the sightings of his friends stopped. My dad never told me who won that game. He said the least he could do was keep it a secret. Also, I was one of the only people my dad told this story to, and the only reason he had started to tell me this story is because of me asking why he used to be so revered at one point in time when I was younger. After asking, he began to tell me why. I'm 24, and can assure you that his story chilled me to the core for a while. Sometime back in the early 90s, my then girlfriend and I lived in a Victorian terraced house. Nothing overtly spooky ever occurred there, apart from the neighbors complaining that someone had been in their house and moved things around while they were away. They were alarmed enough to call the police, and seeing as there was a shared roof space along the terrace, we were briefly questioned, as were the other neighbors. Weirdly, the police asked if there had been any paranormal activity in either of our houses, which we obviously laughed off at the time. A few months later, my girlfriend and I were laying in bed with the lights out. I was on my back with my eyes open, when slowly a luminescent hollow ball faded into view, seemingly made up of lots of very small dim fluorescent rods, like the magnified pictures of bacteria you see. The ball was about 1 meter across and perhaps 1.5 meters above the middle of the bed. It was obvious I was having some kind of pre-sleep hallucination. A few seconds later it faded, and I turned to my girlfriend and said, "I just saw a small ball of light floating over the bed." She had seen it too. We lay there shocked. Soon after, another hollow ball appeared, this time made up of dim, fluorescent triangles. It lasted a few seconds and faded away. I think after that, our eyes were tightly shut and heads went under the duvet, but the experience was never repeated, as far as any of us saw. I told this story to somebody once, and they wondered what would have happened if we'd have reached up to this strange object. My Girl Guides group used to meet in the elementary school library, where there was an ongoing rumor that one of the custodians died under the school, and you could see him opening and closing the doors as he walked through the school. That you could hear his breathing and the keys on his belt jingle as he continued his job in the afterlife. This rumor was around for a long time, even when I attended school. Several times when my guide group was leaving the library, a chair or two would fall off the desk. We used to say it was the ghost getting angry that we were leaving. My mother was one of the guide leaders, so I would almost always leave last. When we were wrapping up a meeting one night, a friend and I were hanging out in the library reading the books while the other girls were getting picked up. My mother called us from down the hall, and we got up to leave, and as soon as we walked out the door, every single chair crashed to the ground, and the power bumped. As cliché as it sounds, I think about that ghost a lot, whether or not he was ever real. After my grade graduated to high school, his activity stopped completely and he was slowly forgotten. I don't think his stories are told anymore in the school. A lot of the staff retired and were replaced, and my age group who would remember him all graduated or have graduated already. And honestly, it feels like I've lost a friend. I'm a pretty logical guy. Agnostic, leaning towards atheist. So I think all the supernatural stuff is total crap. Sorry. There's only one thing that happened to me a few years ago though that I've never been able to explain away. Let's see what you make of it. I'm out running errands and pull into a grocery store. I have to pee, but the grocery store has a unisex bathroom near the entrance, so I figure I'll just use that. As I'm walking out of my car towards the entrance, I'm overtaken by an older gentleman in a tan overcoat. I'm a pretty fast walker, but the guy was clearly in a hurry. I'm following maybe 10 to 15 feet behind him into the store, and sure enough he beelines it to the bathroom. He steps in quickly and shuts the door. Okay, fine, clearly this guy has more to do than I do, so I wait. A few minutes pass. Oh man, he must be taking a poo. 5 minutes pass. Seriously, dude, I really have to pee at this point and I'm getting really impatient. After 10 minutes, I'm getting quite concerned, so I knock on the door. There's no answer. Perhaps he didn't hear me. So I knock again, but there's still nothing. After waiting a few more minutes, I check the door handle, which he didn't lock. That's when I open the door, and the restroom is empty. I seriously watched that guy enter the bathroom and close the door. There was only one way out, and I was standing right in front of it. Short of a false memory in my brain, to this day I cannot explain what happened to the mystery bathroom man.
Where I come from, the paranormal entity we're aware of is called a jinn. They are believed to be a bit like humans, but invisible and made of smoke. My grandma swears one day when she was out in the field at night, she saw a jinn. They started throwing stones at her and spooked her horse, and she heard barefoot noises chasing after her with no one behind her for at least a mile. I personally didn't believe any of it, but she still gets scared while recounting the story. I myself have had a few strange things happen to me as well, but they're probably just mere coincidences. I'll let you be the judge though. The first thing happened when I was a child, staying in my aforementioned grandmother's house for the summer. It's in a village, no life or sounds around after 10 p.m, and I was sleeping with my father in the bed, when suddenly I awoke. I swear to God I saw a dark figure praying on top of us. Praying like Muslims do 5 times a day, you know. I looked at it for about 3 seconds or so, and it was just a very dark shadow. I immediately closed my eyes. I didn't want to be a coward who wakes up his dad for probably nothing. I hear no sounds, nothing that makes any sound at all. And I didn't feel strange or feel like something was wrong. Just scared the living crap out of me. After calming myself down, I went to sleep again. There was an old fan spinning in the room because it was so hot. In the morning, I thought it was probably the shadow of it due to the very bright moonlight coming from the window. But God, what a scare it was. The second time, I'm in my grandmother's house again. They told me to grab something from upstairs. It's daytime, and as I'm slowly climbing the stairs, suddenly someone sprints past me and heads for the upstairs, scaring me crapless while doing so. I look to see that it's my aunt and don't say a word. She probably has some business to do right away. She reaches upstairs way before me and vanishes from my line of sight. I get there too, grab what they need from me, and head back down. Now, this only took about 5 seconds, and I was just near the stairs. I head down to see my aunt sitting down, having coffee with my mum. It was impossible. I don't know if I imagined the whole someone running past me, but I swear that I saw my aunt go upstairs and I didn't hear come back down because I was right on the staircase. I still don't know what that was. It's probably worth mentioning that my aunt was having very intense sleep paralysis and everybody was telling her it was a jinn messing with her. They said someone put a spell on her for the jinn to target her. The woman she spoke to told her there is a water well near our grandma's house and that the jinn lives there. She wrote her something in Arabic and never had night paralysis or anything spooky happen to her again. In that same house, my father and I were watching a found footage exorcism movie, and in one of the most intense scenes, the door to our right slowly opened, making that typical horror movie ghost door opening sound. My father looks at me, and I look at him. We both look at the dark room, staring at us, and he says, "What the hell?" We close the door and continue the movie, and it didn't happen again. Must have been the wind, right? In my own house, I'm watching a YouTube video late at night, and I hear 3 knocks on the house's front door. I heard them slow and strong 3 times. So, around here we have superstitions for everything, and my mind goes, oh my god, it is 3 times. They say the dead knock 3 times at the door when they come for a visit, and it was 3 a.m. I was crapping myself, shaking, and I yell for my mum. She doesn't hear me, but my father wakes up and I told him what I heard. He goes down to the front door to check it. It's probably just the pipe, son. There was nothing after all. The jinn stuff is scary, especially when you grow up hearing so much gossip about them all the time. I personally don't believe in them, but still, some things that I experienced I just can't find a logical solution that I'm satisfied with. I will preface this by saying that I am on the fence about my belief in ghosts. I think there are too many witnesses, too many videos, and too much evidence for there to be nothing going on. However, I have my doubts about the authenticity of orbs and electronic voice phenomena, especially involving those who set out to prove that ghosts exist, more so if those people are making a television program on the topic. I have no evidence, just my word against the world. I'm not here to prove anything. All I can say is what happened to me, and I can't explain it. Let me take you back about 20 years ago. It was August, and I was on break from college in Chicago. I was visiting back home in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and had brought a friend from college with me, Mike. During the day, we had gone with another friend called Aaron to the old sanatorium grounds on the outskirts of the town of Howell. Originally, the Michigan State Sanatorium was used to treat patients with tuberculosis. After antibiotics and vaccines led to a huge drop in cases, the place became the Hillcrest Center for Developmental Disabilities. The buildings had been torn down in the 80s, however the area was still creepy, like finding fire hydrants randomly in the woods, and steeped in urban legends, such as there being inaccessible tunnels that had long ago filled with snowmelt and rainwater. We never found the tunnels, but what we did find was something that looked like it might have been an entrance to a building at one point. It had 2 extremely overgrown evergreen shrubs alongside a couple of waist-high decorative walls. The walls composed of stacks of hand-sized stones bonded with concrete. They were crumbling from age and neglect. We thought it was a cool and creepy find, so much so that Aaron pried a stone from the wall as a souvenir. Later we stopped by the Ann Arbor Denny's to hang out with the campers, a name given to those who routinely hang out at the 24-hour restaurant to smoke, drink coffee, and socialize. Aaron proudly displayed his stone on our table, which caught the attention of our waiter, a friend of ours called Sebastian. He was one of those people who considered himself either a psychic or an empath, something along the lines of the 6th sense. I always just go along with those type of claims. I can neither prove nor disprove someone is psychic. I figure as long as no one's getting hurt, what's the harm in letting them believe? Anyway, Sebastian's smile dropped upon seeing the stone and he inquired about it.
After telling him how we obtained it, Sebastian insisted Aaron put it away as it had a bad energy. The idea of the stone having negative attachments eventually led to plan for Aaron, Mike and I to go back to the sanatorium grounds that night, except this time we would be joined by a fourth person, a Denny's camper called Steve. Sometime after midnight, probably 2 in the morning, the 4 of us were driving down Sanatorium Road. Due to the brightness of the full moon, we easily found the old entrance. It was at that point when things got weird. Aaron began pacing around in a rage, occasionally kicking and cussing. The impression we got was that he was possessed by a spirit. Whether or not this was true is impossible to verify. Aaron had a history of embellishment to make his stories more dramatic or exciting, and also had ADHD and years' worth of anger issues. Him behaving erratically wasn't exactly uncommon. As usual, I just went along with it. Soon after, Steve started acting differently. His attitude went from upbeat to subdued, and he started talking in a somber tone. He proceeded to sit on the ground, his back against part of the stone wall. To find out what was going on, Mike and I tried talking to him. While he acknowledged our presence, he acted like we were strangers to him, but not in any alarmed or reprehensive way. It was like if you tried to start up a conversation with a stranger sitting next to you on the bus, polite but withdrawn, cautious perhaps. Now, I didn't know Steve very well. I didn't know if he was prone to embellishment or lying to get attention, so I tried asking him if he knew anything about tuberculosis. This was a test to see if there was a spirit possessing him. My logic being that Steve probably didn't know the history of the place, but perhaps a patient who died there may have a response to a question about their ailment. He replied that I should check on my friend, referring to Aaron, who was by then growling while stomping at the side of one of the walls with such force we thought he was attempting to knock it down. Then, Mike clutched at his chest. He fell to his knees, saying it felt like someone was squeezing his heart. This, to me, was perplexing. We knew Mike pretty well. He was an Eagle Scout and a devout Catholic. I never knew him to lie nor embellish. I could see Aaron and possibly Steve playing up with the idea that they were possessed, maybe a prank, or perhaps playing up the suggestive nature of wanting to have a supernatural experience so badly you believe you're actually having one. The same way if a person is told that they are in a haunted house, the person is more inclined to think they feel a presence. Mike, however, never struck me as that type. He seemed to have some empathic ability to at least sense those around him. I know this because I like to play a prank where I walk very quietly and stand an inch or two behind someone without them knowing, so that when the person turns around, they bump into me and are startled. However, I could never get this to work on Mike. Every time I tried, he would say hi to me, letting me know he could sense me behind him. Maybe he could sense me, maybe he saw me in the reflection of his glasses or something like that. I don't know. As usual, I just went along with it. Before long, things started to wind down. Mike was feeling better, Aaron and Steve were returning to normal, yet I hadn't felt or seen anything. So I stepped away from the entrance area into an adjacent open field, still unsure if anything I witnessed was real. I was curious if I could sense something, so I went into a sort of meditative state, just opening myself up to my sensations. After a few minutes, Aaron, Steve and Mike came my way to return to the Jeep so we could get going. I joined them as we walked and I felt this heavy dark feeling come over me. At some point Aaron asked me a question, and when I replied he said he didn't sound like me. Not a different voice, but more like my tone, like when Vincent D'Onofrio's character snapped in Full Metal Jacket. The way he talked was how I spoke, and the feeling of sanity lost in anger was how I felt. Mike would later tell me that at that moment he couldn't sense me anymore, which really alarmed him. As we drove out of the sanatorium grounds, my mood got darker and darker. There was just this building rage inside of me, and once we got back to the main road, Aaron stopped at a gas station.
As he went inside the store, I climbed out of the Jeep and proceeded to repeatedly punch the passenger seat. I'm talking a red-faced, teeth-clenched, growling, frenzied assault. After a while, I ran out of steam, and with it, the anger was gone, and felt slightly drained after, but otherwise fine. Aaron later told me that he was worried that if I went too far from the sanatorium grounds while I was still experiencing whatever this was, that it might bond with me forever. I don't know if that's true or not. I can't speak for what happened for my friends. All I can say with certainty is what happened to me. Was it possession by a ghost? Did something lingering, negative attach itself to me? I don't know. What I do know is nothing happened to justify such anger. Nobody said anything, nothing bad happened to me. Everything was fine, and then it wasn't. And that is something I can't explain. On a side note, in the 2 decades since this happened, the old sanatorium property has been turned into a neighborhood of luxury housing. I haven't had any confirmed reports of paranormal activity from residents of that neighborhood, but I wouldn't want to live there, that's for certain. I used to live in a haunted house. It was a few hundred years old, and in a village that was much older. The oldest house there was built in the 1400s. I was around 5 or 6, and we moved out when I was 11. In the first year, I was an extension of the house. My bedroom was over next door's kitchen, if that makes sense, and my bedroom door was fine, on the hinges, but kept being pushed open. It couldn't physically open without the handle being pushed down, so there was no explanation as to how this happened. I switched rooms, so me and my sister were in the room over our house. Mirrors would flip out of desks, and other things would fall over randomly with no explanation as to how. Footsteps would be heard from upstairs, and there was always a weird atmosphere too, like you knew something was there. If my whole family didn't experience the same thing, then I wouldn't have believed it. We always heard the name Walter being said. In primary school, one of my friend's granddads used to live in our village growing up. He asked which house we lived in, and when he said, "Oh, that was Walter's house." That kind of set in stone for us that something was seriously up. Although it never hurt us, I think it was just having fun. My younger sister made claims of a woman who played with her teddies when she was around 2, and my mum saw a young boy sitting on our steps, and she definitely wouldn't make that up. The atmosphere was pretty scary. When a house is haunted, and I go in, I can feel it now, if that makes sense. I grew up with a ghost. My brother and both my parents acknowledge we had a ghost in our house. In fact, when my parents sold the house in 1995, they actually disclosed the house was haunted. I became aware of him when I was around 5. We never saw him, it was just a feeling or a presence in the room. Though I never saw his physical form, he manifested in my thoughts as a Confederate soldier, as I live in the south of Georgia. In high school, I went to the library, because this was the late 70s, early 80s, and researched as much as I could about the Civil War battles in the area, and whether or not our house was built on top of a graveyard or anything like that. Thankfully, there's no record to say it was. I called him Harvey after the rabbit in the Jimmy Stewart movie, and he seemed to like the name. To me, he was my guardian angel and protected me when I was scared and would make me feel safe. As an aside, my maternal grandmother was criminally insane and tried to murder me when I was 12. She was such an evil woman. I knew she would come back to finish the job on me, I swear. I could always feel Harvey's presence, and I knew as long as he was around I was safe from her. Though it was creepy as hell to hear him walk around the house, and he'd close doors that were left open. Yes, you would walk into a room, and halfway across the room the door would close for you. My dog would begin barking when Harvey would enter the room, and would stare at the part of the room in which I felt he was standing in. He also had a fetish about scissors. Never really figured that one out. We could never keep a pair of scissors in the house longer than a few weeks, and then they'd vanish. My parents would ask me and my brother, and we'd be like, nope, no idea. When my parents sold the house in 95, they were cleaning out the garage and found over 40 pairs of scissors stashed in the back behind a metal shelving unit. We figured Harvey put them there. Maybe he was very cautious of them. He was also helpful. My mum and I worked together at Bell South in the early 90s,
and I was living on my own at the time. She comes into work and is upset because she dropped her glasses and stepped on them that morning and they were broken, so she was having a hard time reading stuff that day. My dad was out of town and my brother lived in Boston, so we get through the workday. I've picked on her somewhat for her glasses, and then we went on with our respective ways home at the end of the day. Later that evening, my mum calls me and tells me I'm quite the sneaky one and that she really appreciates what I did for her. I ask her what I did. She goes on to tell me she really appreciates me getting her glasses fixed for her, as when she got home, they were on the kitchen table, as she'd left them in the upstairs master bathroom, and that they were repaired, the frames no longer broken. I told her point blank to thank Harvey as I didn't do it. My brother was in another state and my dad was out of town on business, and it's not like we're the kind of people that just give anyone keys to our house to get in. We don't trust people that much. So yeah, it was probably Harvey the ghost. When I got married, I felt like he followed me to my house for a bit, but then he left, as he realized I had a husband that loves me and looks out and protects me. I have no need for my guardian angel, and haven't done in decades, but I know if I should need him, Harvey will hopefully reappear. I hope whomever he is, his protection is appreciated, as always. I have severe generalized anxiety disorder and used to get panic attacks and/or anxiety attacks daily at school. One time in my senior year of high school, I left the classroom and hid in the bathroom because I felt like I was going to freak out. The material was just overwhelming, and I felt like I was behind and that everyone in class knew it. So I panicked and was having one of the worst panic attacks I've ever had. And this sensation of I'm going to die, which to others may be common but to me was quite rare, came over me. I felt awful, and when I closed my eyes, something happened that had never happened before. The numbers 5182 flashed into my mind, which was incredibly bizarre, and like I said, had never happened before. Now, when I stopped, I instantly calmed down and felt calm. The numbers were gone. The weirdest part about this is that not even a week later, my dad was found dead at his home. You remember those numbers when I closed my eyes? Turns out, they were his house numbers, 5428. I wasn't even aware of it at the time.
I'm a Catholic, and for a period of time in my mid-20s, I visited some monasteries as I was open to the possibility of being a monk or friar. During this time, I spent around a week in a Benedictine monastery in the western United States. One night during my stay, I joined the monks for Compline. Compline is the prayers that they say right before going to bed. It's sometimes just called night prayers, and is one part of it where you ask for God to protect you during the night. We all know that the night is when we're probably most vulnerable, so it's fitting to do so. So after the nightly routine, I went down to the monastery basement because I needed to either iron some clothes or do last-minute laundry. I can't remember which. When I got down there, the laundry room light was off, as well as the light to the hallway that led to it. I walked straight into the laundry room, and when I did, I slipped on the floor and almost fell but caught myself. When I inspected the room with the lights on, I could see there was water all over the floor and the hallway to the laundry room was flooded a bit. The floor in the laundry room was very hard, so if you slipped and hit your head, you'd probably have a bad injury or worse. I'm alone in there, trying to dry up the floor as best I can with what I could find. I remember just being in there thinking I wish one of the monks would come down here so that I could let them know and we could at least put some warning signs up so no one slips. Shortly after that, one of the elder monks came down the hallway and he looked confused, like he was looking for someone that wasn't there. I took advantage of him being there and told him that there had been a flooding issue down here and it needed attention. This is where it became strange. He told me he had just gotten a crackly phone call to the landline in his room that someone, claiming to be their maintenance guy, told him there was a leak and he needed to come down to check it out. He asked me if I'd seen anyone in the area of the basement before I got there, and I told him no. The lights were off and no one was there. The source of the water ended up clogging up a water drain outside the basement, and it was raining that night, so the water was flooding in. Anyway, a monk called the maintenance guy right while we were speaking there and asked if he'd just called him about the leak. The maintenance guy said no. At this point, the monk and I were both kind of baffled. I mean, who the heck called him if it wasn't the maintenance guy? Especially since the man who called him said he was the maintenance guy and with the same name. At this point, I had a moment where I felt a little eerie but also comforted. After all, we had just prayed for protection during the night. I don't know who exactly spoke to the monk to warn him, but I had a feeling it was an angel, to make sure no one would be hurt. This experience left me with a sense that we're truly not alone in the universe, even if we might feel that way sometimes. Let me tell you a story about how a ghost harassed me when I was a child. When I was 10, we moved to a new house in the country. A cozy, homey place, very comfortable. When I think of home, I think of it, and I miss it often. I like to imagine I'll go back to it someday and buy it. That being said, it was the oddest damn house. From what I understand, it had started life in a nearby town, and then was physically moved about 6 miles out. Someone then tacked on about 25% more house, I think the family who lived there before us, and I'm told it was some creative DIY. Anyway, they tacked on the new master bedroom and bath and extended the living room, then an enclosed screened-in back porch. My parents got the new master, my sister and I got the original master, behind was this newer porch add-on, and I have no idea why they added that porch because it just made our room dark all of the time. The moon had to be large enough and set or rise at just the right time for us to get light in there at night. A whole year passes and we're very happy. We liked the house, but sometimes, about 30 minutes to an hour after my sister and I turned out the lights in our room, something would start bumping in the attic. Big thumps. Like someone with 2 peg legs started going round in circles. My sister and I called the thump bumps. We made up whole stories about them. Honestly, I think if my unexplained experiences had remained this simple, I would have chalked it up to rats, which we definitely had. The thing is, I've since dealt with both rats, wild and tame, and while it's not impossible for them to make such sounds, why constant circles? Why did it sound so heavy? And if it were jumping, you'd hear the answering slap of its tail. Also, rats have their very own lives to run. They're not automated. Why take enormous bodily leaps and circles in a steady, rhythmic pattern for 2 to 3 hours at a time, several days a week? But whatever, we weren't afraid. It was odd, not bad. Early summer rolls in. I've turned 11. And I woke up suddenly one night when I heard someone doing dishes, running water, dishes clinking against one another, and normally I would have seen some light on in the corridor wall, but it was black, which meant someone was doing some dishes in the dark. I glanced at my clock, 2 a.m. I was thirsty, so I may as well check out what's going on. Just as I turned the corner from the living room, the sound cut off like someone had hit stop on a cassette player. There was no squeak of the faucet handle being twisted, or the stream slowing to a trickle of the dishes being set down or anything. The sound stopped, mid-splash, mid-clink, and I was left in complete silence. Nervous but now committed, I slinked into the kitchen. The sink was bone dry, and everything clean. Why shouldn't it have been, when we had finished the dishes the night before? I still have a clear memory of the moonlight glinting off the faucet. I didn't know what to think, but nothing seemed awry. I drank my water and went to bed. I don't know how long passed, only that it was summer and a Sunday. That morning I had been playing with my toy dinosaurs, of which I had 5. I lined them up on my bed very neatly before heading off to church. I was the last one out the house because my dinosaurs were important business. Well, when we had finally returned, my parents unlocked the door, and in we tromped. My brother first, who turned into his room ahead of me, and then me second. I stopped right in the doorway and I felt real fear hit me for the first time. My dinosaurs were no longer lined up on my bed, but scattered across it, like they had been played with. One of them was lying underneath the bed. One was lying halfway under my pillow, and one was lying at the foot of the bed. Worst of all, my velociraptor had been jammed together with the iguanodon, like they were locked in battle. This one bothers me a lot, because it's scary no matter how I interpret it. If it wasn't spirit shenanigans, then who did it? Dad was unimaginative, Mum was busy, and although my sisters and brothers would be excellent suspects, the last one out the house was me, and there had been no time for anyone to come in and mess around with my dinosaurs. I still asked my sister if she'd done it, and she said no. The most logical thing to think is that a stranger broke into the house, only played with my dinosaurs after seeing how cool and awesome they were lined up, decided to leave after regretting it, and then did so, leaving, which frankly is a terrible thought. In fact, there is nothing scarier than a human being, and I prefer ghosts to them any day, but I guess I'm getting off topic now. So I'm seriously unnerved connecting the dots. I don't know what they suggest. I put my dinosaurs away and told no one. Well, not long after, I wake up in the middle of the night. It's an unbelievably dark room, but this is normal. I was very cozy, deliciously rested, safe and snug. One problem was my left arm was sticking up out of the covers at an awkward angle, like I was trying to slap the ceiling. It was actually uncomfortable, but I was so relaxed that I didn't want to even move or put down my arm. Suddenly, a warm adult hand presses down against mine. It drags it down against my palm. The ball of their hand catches on the ball of mine. The skin is rough, almost moist, and I can feel all the fingers. It drags off all floppy away, and it was like being high-fived by a zombie. I jerked my hands under the cover, and I'm now wide awake. I stare into the inky black and listen intently. I realize I didn't hear my sister breathing. I couldn't hear anything. Oh God, I wanted to hear something, anything. I lie there, not daring to move a muscle, straining my eyes and ears. I was certain there was a person there in the darkness, but I couldn't hear them at all. I was sure they'd speak. They'd have to speak, right? You don't high-five strangers in the night. I waited a while and fell asleep. And when I woke up the next morning, I didn't say anything about it to anyone. I listened to everybody at the breakfast table, and no one mentioned coming to my room or seeing weird strangers in the night. I honestly didn't know what to think about it. I had been wide awake, I knew it. A sleepwalker perhaps, maybe my sister or my mum, but no one I knew was a sleepwalker in the family, and I decided to put it behind me. That night I woke up again, and there's a bit of moonlight, but thanks to the porch, it's a mere sliver on the windowsill behind me. It spent all of its strength just getting there and can illuminate nothing. And this time, I felt like I was waiting. I tried not to wait and told myself I woke up in the middle of the night all the time, and was not going to give any more high fives to people at night. I had my arms under the covers and everything. A few minutes go by and I hear my brother shuffle out of his room, and I immediately relaxed. Oh, thank goodness, it was just him, probably going to the bathroom. But instead of walking to the bathroom, which was right across from his room, he went to the end of the hall. Okay, he's getting a drink, fair enough. But then he turned around at the end of the hall and shuffled back. This is where things get weird. He reached the door to my room, then turned around and shuffled back to the end of the hallway, then turned around and shuffled back towards my door. He then did this about 4 to 5 times, and I was getting increasingly more concerned. Finally, I sat up in bed. The shuffling had reached my door once more, and I could see nothing. "Sam?" I asked. "Are you okay?" There was complete silence. My heart started crawling up my throat. And then the shuffling began again, but this time on the other end of the hallway. I fly under the covers, which is where I lied for an hour, while a barefoot ghost shuffled back and forth. My door was open. It could come in, and it could even see me. But you know what? I ended up falling asleep. All it was doing was shuffling, and the sound became tiresome, and I was tired. I guess it wasn't that bad. The next morning I am again left in a conundrum. Do I tell someone? What the hell does one say to something about this? I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't even know what it was. I wasn't even sure I could trust my experience. It was so strange. For the record, my family was one step above Christian fundamentalism. Southern evangelicals believe in a spirit word of black and white. Either a spirit is God's or it's the devil's. There's no middle ground. They also don't tend to believe that ghosts are returned dead, but actors of spiritual anarchy, to confuse the faithful and lead them astray. Well, I was an extremely devout child, and I'd read a lot about the devil, and how it came in groups, and they were destructive, and they caused mayhem. And my spirit thing had exercised in the hallway and high-fived me. I wasn't really sure how I was going to categorize that. I woke up that night wide awake. This time there was no waiting. The shuffling started at the far end of the hallway. It walked up to the door, and it did not stop. It walked into my room. My bedroom's floor plan was like so. My sister's bed towards the inside of the room, and my bed sat in front of the hallway. There was an E-shaped walking space, and my new shuffle body was like, hell yeah, I love to shuffle in pathways shaped like a capital E. It was summer, and I had thrown off everything but a single thin sheet. This creepy thing began poking me through the sheet. It poked through the side of my arms and legs and hips. It had a lot of fingers, but generally it would poke me on the side it was walking. The fingers were small. I kept hoping I was imagining it. Maybe it was the fan. Let it just be the fan whiffing on the sheets. Did I fall asleep this time? Absolutely not. I lay there still, barely able to breathe. I don't know for how long. I kept hoping my sister would wake up. Eventually the room started lightening. Dawn was coming and I started straining my eyes. Soon it would grow light enough for me to see my tormentor. The shuffling stopped at the head of the bed, and I heard 3 drawn-out sighs in a woman's voice. Each one was identical to the one before, like a recording being played, and just like that, was gone. I launched out of bed, and to my surprise, my sister followed me immediately. I was angry at first, like, "You mean you didn't do anything?" She was 9. I threw myself into my mum's bed and started babbling about ghosts. There were ghosts in my room. It was walking around my bed and touching me, and I sighed, and it high-fived me, and why wasn't my mum looking concerned? Why did she look crabby? "Please stop," she said. "You're going to scare your sister." I turned to my sister, and she stared at me blankly and said nothing. I realized she must have just jumped out of bed because I had disturbed her, not because she had been awoken by the ghosts. This was beside the fact. My mother didn't believe me. I hate to admit this, but I would routinely lie as a child. I'm not talking about mundane activities like whether I had cleaned my room or finished my homework. I'm talking about today I saw a dragon while riding the bus, or I found a magical pool full of fairies. The only thing worse than being disbelieved by my own mother was the realization that I had played myself. I was the boy who cried wolf, but instead of the wolf, it was the shuffle ghost. So that night I prayed before I went to bed, threw on my comforter even though it was uncomfortably warm, and when I woke up suddenly that night, right on the dot, I woke up afraid and mad. Like, let's throw hands. If Mum wasn't going to help me, I had to help myself. Right on schedule, the shuffling begins from the end of the hallway in the room, and the moonlight is starting to pool on the floor, but it's not illuminating and the ghost isn't getting very close to it. Thankfully, no more poking. It's only gotten 3/4 of the way into its cycle when I leap out of bed, ball my hands into fists and stand straight, throw my shoulders back, and this was great. Everything was so far going as planned. I was 11 years old, and nobody is afraid of babies except for smaller babies. The ghost stopped. I could feel it regarding me from the corner. It felt so apathetic. I groped around for something to say and pulled out the verbal equivalent of the housewife who starts throwing flower pots and ballpoint pens at home intruders. "You better not hurt my sister," I said loudly, hoping my sister would wake up. And she didn't. I stood there in silence, feeling dumber by the second. I was going to try and fist fight a ghost? After a few minutes, I lay back down, and just like that, the shuffle began again, and I spent the rest of the night wide awake and in despair. Again, as the dawn of the light began to fill the room, and just before I could see anything, the ghost sighed 3 times and was gone. Again, I sprang out of bed and marched to my parents' room. My dad had come home the night before. He often worked faraway locations at weeks for a time, so as I tried to tell Mum what happened, he leaned up on an elbow and listened, and he believed me. My mum tried to tell him that I said stories like that all the time. I don't remember the exact gist of the conversation, but he prayed with me and I felt better. That night was Wednesday night, so church. Dad put in a prayer request for me and sang a special song he'd selected and mirrored my fears. I'd felt so seen and cared for, and that night he prayed over my doorway, asking God to put an angel there. He also told me to say if the ghost showed up, and I went to sleep elated. I woke up again that night, this time buzzing with excitement. Was I about to see a ghost fight an angel? The shuffling started as usual at the end of the hallway, and as it grew closer, I was so afraid that I may have to face the ghost myself, and I waited for a sign to see the prayer had worked. Shuffles straight through the door, didn't even hesitate, right beside the bed. This time, the moonlight fell far enough so that I should have seen something walking or pressing into the carpet at least, but my heart sank. The shuffle stopped right beside me. I could feel it regard me. "In the name of Jesus, get out and never come back." There was a huge silence, and a long woman's sigh identical to the ones before, and like that it was gone. I was able to sleep the rest of the night, and the next morning I raced up to my dad and gave him a huge hug and told him it had worked. I have to interject a note here. I'm no longer evangelical, but in fact an atheist. This one experience kept me religious longer than I might have been otherwise. It was also the seed of doubt and thought, because, like a bad horror movie, it didn't end. About 6 in the afternoon, I was sitting in my brother's room, reading a racist primer from the 50s, as one does. I started to feel uncomfortable. I felt like I was being watched, and I couldn't pay attention to the text. I wanted to get up and leave, but when I really thought about it, I got a bit tetchy. No, there's absolutely no reason for me to leave, so I won't. I started staring at the page again, not doing any reading, as the uncomfortable sensation grew on me. And then from the door, a man's sigh, but it was like the woman's high-pitched sigh, but down. I flung the book and sprang, and when I hit the doorway, I passed through a heavy coldness and was stepping through a door. As I walked into the living room, I marveled. Dad was watching Wheel of Fortune turned all the way up, and my brother was on the computer. My mum and sister were cooking and conversing loudly. When I had been in that room, I hadn't heard anything. It had been completely silent. After that, all obvious weird activity dropped off. It didn't end though. A number of small bizarre things followed me into my mid-20s. At one point I had a customer tell me I had an angel and I said, haha, no thanks. I have many theories as to what they are. Mostly I want nothing to do with it, but I'm not going into any haunted houses. I don't trust something that can look or sound like anything it wants. I can't understand its motivations, and that alone is reason to stay far away. I became an atheist and was able to explain away a lot of nonsense I had thought was a miracle when I was a child. But I still haven't been able to explain this. And honestly, I'm kind of grateful. It keeps me humble. I feel like it truly was a rare experience. I was a paranormal investigator, sat up in an old house. There were 5 of us sitting in the addition of the first floor, where the last owner took her last breath. We were listening to the history when from above we heard it, footsteps walking back and forth, the light swinging overhead with force. All 5 of us were in this room, and no one else was there. It was bizarre. We decided to head upstairs but left a bell on the bed, letting the supposed ghost know if she wanted us that she could ring the bell. As we headed up the very narrow and steep steps to the 2nd story, what did we hear? The bell. We stood there all in the stairway deciding either to go up or go down. We didn't want to split up because then any footsteps above or below had to be discounted, as it could easily be us. We decided to check on the bell and then go up. There were other things that happened in that house. Some people claimed to have been touched or felt hands on them. We would hear scratches or whispers and footprints above us if on the first floor, or below us if on the second story. On the second story, I did do an investigation by myself while everyone was outside, and I wanted pictures but nothing happened. I went back here 2 times and got some EVPs, but the bell was the craziest thing from that location. The second location will be called the theatre. This was the last investigation I had with this paranormal group before the tragedy happened. Car accident not related to anything paranormal, in which we lost 50% of the group. This theatre still haunts my dreams. Something yanked on my necklace and the boiler almost blew up. My voice recorder suddenly went off without me touching it, not once but 3 times, the last time without batteries in it. I got separated from the others in the basement tunnels and found myself facing a shadow of a person standing before me. When leaving, I suddenly felt very ill and had to pull over and throw up as I left the city. I got suddenly blurry. There was an overall sense of dread, like if I didn't get out, something was going to happen. Back at home, my neck had scratches from where my necklace was pulled and my arm was bruised. I think spirits can feast on vulnerability, and during the theatre investigation, I was very vulnerable due to an encounter with a man as I was walking from my car to the theatre. So I think that shook me so much I opened myself to paranormal, and the paranormal loves to mess with weak individuals, so it chose me to mess with. At the first location I wasn't stressed out at all, and able to keep my mental health strong, and therefore the paranormal chose to focus on those who had opened and vulnerable minds. I still try to go on as many paranormal investigations that I can get my hands onto. I managed to be a part of a non-taped investigation with the ghost hunters in Kentucky, went on ghost tours in London and Hawaii and Poland, and I plan on visiting Waverly Hills and other haunted hotspots, but I'll never go back to that theatre, even for $1 million. I experienced what I had to offer, and I feel satisfied there is no further business I have with that place. However, with the first location, I feel we have become good acquaintances and can't wait for my next visit. I feel like I haven't experienced anything that place has to offer, so until I do, I don't mind dropping in and saying hi. I grew up in a household that I believe had a haunted house. The house was surprisingly large in Burnett, Texas. At the time that these stories were taking place, I was 6 years old. This house was a place that used to be a rodeo, and from what I have been told, I believe it's factual, because when I grew up in the house, there was a full-scale kiddie train in the backyard with a complete train track, the conductor's booth, and the cars for everyone to sit in. At night, sometimes my mother would hear noises and see the silhouette of a man in a cowboy hat running down the hallway. By the time the man's silhouette would get to the other end of the hallway, it would vanish. Due to the fact that I'd never dealt with this story personally, I did not take any stock in the supernatural until much later in life. This next story took place at a trailer home in Weir, Texas. This home is 2 driveways down from the granary that is part of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie film set. The truck from the original movie is still parked outside the granary. I was 13 at the time, and we lived on farmland and had roughly 37 goats and 2 guard dogs. There is a long strand of trees running along the length of a creek on the property, and a second row of trees running the same direction as the first, creating a fair-sized clearing at the back of the property. Just before running into a massive wooded area, we started having an issue shortly after we got the goats. That quickly took a turn for the worse. Over the course of 2 months, these goats began disappearing and getting picked off quickly. One day while I was outside walking down the creek, I walked to the clearing by the back of the property. The grass in the clearing was high. It came up to my waist, and I saw the bloated corpse of one of our goats laying on its side, and a dog-like creature standing over it with its face down against the goat. It was still fairly far away, so I couldn't exactly see all of the creature, nor its features. But it was large, and had odd patches of grey and black fur. I charged full speed at it, and as I got closer, I looked up, and when it looked at me, its closest resemblance was a hyena.
It didn't have a tail, its face seemed odd, and it ended up running away and disappearing somewhere. I couldn't see where it had disappeared to, and ended up leaving without taking a closer look at the goat. Looking back, to better depict this animal, its back was tall and came up to my chest, making it about 5 feet. That was the only time I ever saw this creature. My next story occurred when I was 16, at my current abode. My mum had married my stepdad previously that year, and I kept getting eerie vibes at the house the longer I stayed there. Plus, my older stepsister had told me about the poltergeist that would throw her books across the room and flip through the pages vehemently. One night I was relaxing in the game room and playing World of Warcraft by myself, sitting in a comfortable chair, when the radio turned to static at exactly 3 a.m. The fact that the radio turned on wasn't as scary as the fact that the remote for it had gone missing prior to us moving there, and that we had never found it. I, without looking at the radio, stood up and walked directly towards the TV in front of me, and turned it on. I sat there uncomfortably, talking to my online friends until after 4 a.m., then quietly stood up, turned off the TV and radio, and went to bed. A few years later, I went to bed one night, still in the same house, at a decent hour and fell asleep on my back, face to the ceiling. I woke up at 3 a.m. on the dot with an uneasy feeling, and without blinking, immediately noticed a massive figure standing over me. For reference, to the left of my bed was a bookshelf that was built into the wall and ran from floor to the ceiling. This shadowy figure, which was darker than the darkness of the countryside, was about 6 inches from touching an 8-foot-tall ceiling with his head. I kept my eyes open for a long period of time because I had the feeling that if I blinked, I wouldn't see him again. I looked at him closely and held my quick, drying eyes open for about 15 to 20 seconds, just staring at this shadowy mass on the wall. He was tall, slender, and had what looked like a hood on his head, and the closer I looked, the more I realized that's where the eyes should have been. There was a darkness that was somehow darker than whatever dark substance the rest of him was made from. Everything about his eyes was somehow the darkest part of him. After that span of seconds passed, I blinked and could no longer see him, but had an uneasy feeling about being watched. I turned my back to him and went to sleep. The next year, my girlfriend at the time was sleeping over, just after we watched that movie, Paranormal Activity. And then we went to sleep next to each other. When we woke up, my girlfriend had 3 claw marks down her back for no apparent reason, and she told me she had a dream about a tall, hooded figure walk through the hallway and stop to stare at her from the hallway. I never actually told her about my incident with the shadowy figure. 2 years after this, on my 18th birthday, me and my mum went down to 6th Street in Austin, Texas to get my first tattoo done. After discovering that they wanted to charge me nearly 4 times as much as the guy from my hometown for far worse quality, we left and ended up giving a homeless dude my money because he was honest about going to drink himself silly for the last call. We ended up driving back to Georgetown, Texas, and on the way my mum suggested that we go ghost hunting with the phone application. We drove to a Pedernales electrical company right off IH-35 northbound in Ware, Texas. It was around 2:45 a.m. when we parked in their parking lot. We sat there trying to contact the spirit of a girl named Orange Socks, who was a Jane Doe whose name never got uncovered and whose body was found dumped in the riverbed across the street from where we were parked. The application is a combination of a radar and a chat box where the ghost talks to you. I wasn't sure how I felt about the app initially. It just seemed like a quirky thing that wouldn't work. I told my mum there weren't any ghosts out there, and she decided to drive down the dirt road leading from the Pedernales deeper into Ware. As she drove, I got uncomfortable and told her we should turn around and head home because there probably weren't any ghosts out there. As soon as I said that, the entire radar lit up green with hundreds of little orbs, and the text box began to work, translating like crazy. The application said frog, blanket, tennis, and I barely had enough time to roll my eyes at the building fear just before my mum stopped the car dead in a bridge that was barely a car's length long because a giant bullfrog about a foot wide hopped in front of the car. We both looked up and both saw what looked like a giant blanket flapping vigorously in the wind that didn't exist. Then we both witnessed it vanishing into nothing.
My mum, being the supernatural white woman that she is, gets out the car with a flashlight, much like Fred from Scooby-Doo, and starts to investigate. I, being absolutely freaked out at this point in the premonition, threatened to leave my mother if she didn't get her ass back in the car and drive. She complied, and we left to get a Whataburger on the way to our house. My nerves start to calm down, and I start feeling more at ease about the whole thing. So we step outside so I can smoke a cigarette, and I look over to the parking lot while we're chatting and notice an oddly luminescent tennis ball perched casually at the corner of the parking lot. I start to get uneasy again, and tell my mum we should leave. As we get in the car and drive towards the parking lot exit, there's another tennis ball right at the exit, then placed at the turning lane on our way home. Then placed on the right street until our next turn. These tennis balls led all the way up to the gate of our house, which unless you've been there before is very hard to find, and I usually have to help guests find the place. I'm panicking now because my mum and myself are the only two people at home right now. Everyone else had gone on a 3-hour trip to the coast for the weekend. My mum pulls up to the house and we get out. Me being more cautious than her, I get out slowly and walk behind her. There are 2 electrical boxes for this house, and they're nowhere near each other, and all the lights are usually left on when we're not at home because of how dark it gets. When I say this is the only time the power has cut off in over a decade, I can't make this up. The power in the entire house cut off, and I ran as hard as I could until the lights came back on. Thinking back, there was probably a spot directly under the giant oak tree by our front driveway that looks like a giant cement slab gravestone. It has writing on it. It's not readable from age and weathering. I drove this route the next day from my house back to Whataburger, and none of the tennis balls were there that had been the previous night.
Growing up, I was never really close to my grandmother. My dad would make me and my 2 brothers call her during Christmas, Mother's Day, and her birthday, the usual stuff. And with that being said, I never really knew much about her. When I was about 18, she passed away. My family and I drove to her town to attend her funeral, which was a 10-hour drive. We decided to stay in her apartment since there would be no one there, and we would have to sort through her stuff anyway. One of the nights staying at my grandmother's apartment, I had an awful experience sleeping. I woke up in the middle of the night with a strange white figure glowing next to my bed. I felt as if the figure was pulling the air out of my lungs and I couldn't breathe. There was an extremely high-pitched screeching in my ears. It felt as if the presence was trying to take my soul. I'd never told anyone about this experience because I felt no one would believe me, and that people may judge me. Fast forward about 5 years, I was having dinner at my house with my aunt, whom is that same grandmother's daughter. I turned on a ghost hunting TV show on television, and my aunt really wasn't feeling it. She asked why people watch this type of stuff and that it gives her the creeps. I decided now might be a good time to tell her the story about the night in my grandparents' apartment. I never told my aunt the location of what happened, just that I woke up with a presence near my bed, and that I felt like it was stealing my soul. She just shook her head and told me how my grandmother used to tell her the exact same story. Naturally, I just call it a dream, but after a moment of silence, my friend asked me if I'd seen it too. We put the lights on after that. On that note, I had an incident with a Ouija board later in life as a teen that kind of spooked me out too. We had 2 people using the board and a third one asking questions to prove it worked, and it actually gave answers we shouldn't have known. Something like me asking the other 2 my distant relative's dog's name, and them getting it right 100% despite never having come up before in conversation. It ended up acting incredibly strange, and at the end, we burnt it out of fear.
These are some stories that my grandfather used to tell us when we were kids, about things that happened to him when he was young. Even though I don't know my grandfather is a liar, I was genuinely convinced that all of this really happened. The first is the Nawal. The first story that I remember is that one night when he was at his house, he heard someone knock on the front door. When he came down to see who was calling, he saw by the side of the door that it was a strange creature. Frightened, he went for his Bowie knife, opened the door, and stabbed it in the back, driving it away. The next morning, when he went to the store, the owner told him, "What a blow you gave me." When my grandfather saw the man's back, he had the mark of the Bowie knife. In Mexican folklore, a Nahual is a person that has the ability to transform into an animal. For some time, my grandfather used to work paving roads. One day, while digging in the dirt, his companions quickly began to grab dirt and put it in their pockets. My grandfather, confused, asked them why they were picking it up in such desperation. They shouted at him, "Look, you moron, grab the coins!" And when they finished, they fled. According to my grandfather, it was not his luck to see the coins. It was an old belief that treasures could only be seen by the people for whom they were intended. So if something wasn't meant for you, you weren't allowed to see it. So later, while walking in the streets, my grandfather found a pot full of coal. He took it to his house and left it there for a few days, but because it smelt so bad, he went to a river near the house and threw it in there. After that, one of his relatives visited him. When he learned what happened with the pot, he told him, "Why did you throw it away? The pot had gold inside. What you should have done is put it by your door. If it's meant for someone in your family, you could have given the gold to them, and they would have spent it on something for you." My grandfather quickly returned to the river to look for the pot, but of course it was no longer there. My grandfather told us that one day a priest visited his home, and he forgot a book there. One of his cousins read it and told my great-grandfather that it was prophecies for the future. Here it says that future people will travel under the earth, so like the subway. That all the water you see here is going to disappear. Back in the day, Mexico City was full of water, and nowadays we struggle for it. That at the end of times, the mule is going to give birth, etc. I don't remember what happened to the book, but I think the priest did come back for it. Later, when my grandfather was a child, he was in his home when he saw how a tied-up dead man fell from the roof directly to the ground. Scared, he told my great-grandmother, and when they went to the location, there was no body there to be found.
I have this friend who her and her mum are very witchy-like. Her mum is one scary woman. They had this extremely big and old expensive house. I went and stayed with them one summer when I was about 17. We get there and the house is wonderful. They are bringing us through all the rooms and get to one place where they tell us to never open. Fast forward a week, no one's gone in. But all the bathrooms in the house are being used, except for the one that's in this room. So I think nothing of it. Go into the bathroom and take a leak. Now when I tell you I felt this absolutely chilling thing grab my shoulder, it was big. It felt like fingers down the front of my chest, while it's sitting on my shoulder. I freeze, and after what seemed like forever I heard my name. Clicked back to reality, finished my business and walked out. I found out I was there for over 40 minutes. Fast forward a few more days and I go and stand in the pool at around 11:30 at night. I'm standing in the pool with my phone. When it happens, something grabs my shoulder and I freeze. I drop my phone straight in the water and apparently stood there for over 2 hours until someone found me. To this day, being nearly 30, I still, to this day, experience this strange sensation about twice a year. But I don't lose hours this time, merely minutes, and I still find it creepy. I used to live on an old farm where the farmhands' quarters had been made into a rental apartment. We felt a strong and unwelcoming presence in the apartment at night, movements and such too, but the absolute impressive experience were the horse ghosts. After living there for some time, the owner renewed the old stables to be rented out for horses. Shortly after, 3 horses took residency there, and not long after we heard it for the first time. Around 8 p.m. we heard a horse walk into the courtyard,
We both jumped up and ran out, believing a horse had gotten loose. I ran to the stables, and my ex ran out to look after the horse. When he rapidly pulled open the door to the stables, I saw 3 shocked horses looking back at me with a puzzled expression. My ex hadn't seen anything either, so we shrugged and went back to bed. The day after, it happened again. This time, we ran to the windows and looked out from both sides. Nothing, only the vaguely lit darkness. A couple of days went before we heard it again, and we got used to it and accepted it, as it was the spirit of a horse coming to visit its friends. It kept happening at random, though the time we lived there was always around 8 p.m. Even our neighbor, who was a stern non-spiritual mechanic, heard it and totally lost her mind when she found we heard it too. A while later we learned the farm had burned down many years ago, and we assumed the poor horse had perished. Then, when suddenly new horses arrived, it found some new friends.
A friend was at our place for a sleepover as kids. Bedtime, both lying on the mattress in my room, when suddenly this transparent greenish-hued man came in from the window and just kind of hovered in the air above us for a good 10 to 20 seconds and then evaporated.
When I was 19, my best friend was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. We knew her cancer was terminal, and she had a life expectancy of 5 years at most. Her and I would talk every now and then about passing on, and how even though I was healthy, I could always go before her in a car crash or some other way. We made a pact that no matter which one of us left first, we would return to let the other know that there was more to life after death. She eventually passed away from her illness at 22, leaving behind her husband and 3-year-old son. She passed away on Sunday at 8:20 a.m. I remember the call from her husband vividly. He asked me to bring her son to the hospital because she had passed away. That day was a complete blur. I couldn't find myself to come to the reality that she was no longer with us. It all felt unreal. We were allowed to be with her for a few hours in her hospital room before she was taken away. But while we were there with her, I was in complete shock, and my mind just couldn't process it. But I didn't cry. Leaving the hospital was so strange, because at the time I had no children, and my life revolved around my work, my home, and her. She lived a few minutes from my job at the time, so I would always leave work very early to see her, whether she was at home or the hospital. I loved her so much, I could never be away from her. So now knowing I had to go home and try to process that I would never see her again, threw my life for a spin. That night I couldn't sleep. I just kept trying to make sense of it all. In honesty, I don't even remember the thoughts that were going through my head, but the feelings of loss and confusion were very prevalent in me. I couldn't sleep at all. At around 3 a.m., I felt the most beautiful and reassuring feeling I have ever felt. I felt what I can only describe as a warm hug take over me from head to toe, and I fell asleep. That night I had a dream. In my dream, I called her husband to let him know that she had written me a letter. He then tells me that it's funny because she left him a voicemail. He then asks me to read him the letter, so I read it to him. In this letter, she tells me how thankful she is that we were in her life. She thanked us for taking care of her and loving her, and asked us to please watch over her son, and that she is okay and no longer in pain. She also tells me that we will be okay. As I finish telling him about the letter, my mum comes into the room and wakes me up. She asks me for a pen and paper. I hand her a piece of paper I had and she starts to write. When she finishes, she hands it to me saying she doesn't know why, but something told her to write this and to give it to me. When I read the letter, it was word for word what my best friend had told me in my dream, and she signed it with her father's last name. Now my mum only knew her by her mother's last name. No one outside her close relatives and myself knew what her father's last name even was. so I was very confused as to how she signed it with her father's last name. I asked her why or how she wrote this to me, but my mum didn't know. She just wrote. I explained to her about my dream, and she was as surprised as I was. Immediately, her husband called, and I told him about the letter in my dream. He agreed. They were all her words. My best friend came through with her promise. This made me a believer. I know there is more after death. I'm a 19-year-old female. I live in a small town in South Carolina. I've lived here my whole life in the same house, which was built in 1971. My father bought it with his ex-wife and my mum. His current wife moved in 2001, and I was born in 2002. I'll start at the beginning, but I will mention that I do have a rather messed up memory. For as long as I've been alive, there have been footsteps in the attic. I've always tried to rationalize it, just thinking this is an old house. It's bound to make noise. But a few months ago I heard bells jingling in the attic, like our Christmas decorations. It was above the bathroom, and the footsteps are usually above my room, which is right next door. I told my dad about it, and he went to check for animals, but couldn't find any. Couldn't even find a place where they have gotten in. He told me I was hearing things and probably needed to go to bed, so I did. Then I started hearing what I could only describe as footsteps coming from inside the wall. My mum heard it too. So did our cats. At one point it was behind our coffee maker, and we were both standing there scared that it was a mouse or something. Our cat Katniss was desperately trying to find it but could not. My mum told my dad this time, and an exterminator came out but couldn't find anything either. The noise persisted. Then I heard noises coming from the faucet in the bathtub. It sounded like someone was trying to force the faucet out of its place. I told my dad again, thinking there was a problem with the pipes. He found nothing. The footsteps and the wall noises are continuous, but seem to get louder at night. I don't know if it's just because the house is quiet at night, or if it sounds louder or what. I should mention that our attic is very short and hot. It's not possible for a grown person to stand upright, so no, we don't have someone living there. And my dad checked around and found nothing. Then it began messing with our dogs. The thing scared the hell out of our oldest dog, Amber, twice. None of the other dogs did this, just her, and she did it twice. No knocking on the door that she was lying in front of, which, even if it was there, she wouldn't be afraid of. She'd just start barking her head off. The last thing it does to our dogs is the hardest to talk about. Bouncy is a beagle mix and quite large. The first time was the night before my first day of school. I can't remember which year it was, but it was in at least the last 4 years. I remember I had a coconut hair mask on, and I had just gotten out of the shower, so I wasn't dressed yet, just in a towel, and all of a sudden, I hear snarling and barking, and my mum screaming her head off. I go in there, and we have to physically pry them off each other. Little Bit was injured, but not bad enough to go to the vet, so we just separated them, and they eventually got over it. But they still ended up fighting several more times. I've gotten injured trying to stop them, although I know they didn't mean to hurt me. I remember one time my dad just straight picked up Little Bit and Bounce was attached to her throat, and was also in the air. Eventually they stopped, until a few months ago. It was 3 a.m. I remember very vividly because I was trying to sleep, but was on the phone, and my mum called me out of my room. What could you possibly want, I thought, it's 3 a.m. Her yell was urgent though, so I didn't even bother putting on my shorts, I just ran to the kitchen. She screamed that they were fighting again and needed help. I ran out there with a flashlight, not even bothering to put shoes or pants on, and had to pry them apart by myself because my mum didn't even move from the back porch. At one point, I even hit Bounce in the back with a flashlight because she just wouldn't stop, and I couldn't separate them. I was screaming for my mum, and I'm surprised I didn't awake the neighbors with how much noise was happening. It's terrifying, seeing two animals you love dearly trying to kill each other. I eventually got them apart and held a little bit back. Oh, by the way, earlier the other day Bouncy had come inside with blood on her butt, but we didn't know from what. My mum just called Bounce up to the porch and let her in, and Little Bit was standing there. And when I tell you that I've never seen her look like that, it looked like she'd reverted to, I don't know, primal instinct. It's like her personality and sweetness just drained from her, and I was reminded that day that she was an animal. My mum woke up my dad, and he had the audacity to be inconvenienced. I don't have the best parents, but that's another story. My mum decided that this was the last straw, and one of them needed to go, so we ended up taking Little Bit to the SPCA. But don't worry, we know she was adopted and is fine now. This is just the prelude. The first experience I remember was actually with a friend. I was in middle school, so around 4 to 7. I would go with my friend, this girl Kaylee. She lived down the street and would often come over to my house after school and would sometimes stay for dinner before walking back home. That day was one of them. We had been in my bedroom that I shared with my older sister Tori. Not sure where she was, but she wasn't in the room. My grandparents had this bench filled with toys that they needed to get rid of because we were older and no longer used it, so we were allowed to pick up some stuff and brought those things along with the bench home. One of the things I picked out was a Scooby-Doo stuffed animal. Apparently it was called the Fright Night Scooby stuffed animal. A flashlight was attached to his hand, and whenever you turned it on, there would be a ghost shadow on the light, and he would say something like, "Cover my eyes, too scary," in his iconic Scooby voice. At the time, it was turned off with no batteries and was purely decorative. It had been sitting on the floor in front of my sister's bed, which is on the other side of the room on the door. Me and Kaylee were called for dinner, so I let her walk out of the room before turning off the lights. And I kid you not. This thing goes, "Turn the lights back on, too scary," at the exact same time. Me and Kaylee run out the room. I didn't even shut the door and was screaming about how it just spoke. My parents don't believe me, of course, so we ate. Kaylee went home and I ripped the wires out of that thing and threw it away. My sister moved out when I was 11. I'm 19 now and have our room to myself. It's a strange shape. It's a box, but they didn't finish one wall, so there's a little bump out area. For the longest time, my bed was in that little nook. We had bunk beds that were in the nook. Then we had custom beds built by my dad that were like loft beds, and mine was in the corner. Now I have a proper bed that's too big for it, so I have a desk there with my makeup. The bedroom door is next to where the wall of that desk is on, if that makes sense. The door is across from the desk through my closet. And one day I was sitting there doing my makeup when from the corner of my eye I see a dark figure. I immediately jump thinking it's my mum who had snuck into my room without me noticing, but my door is squeaky, so there's no way I wouldn't have heard. I slowly turn around and then lean around the corner. The door is closed. No one else was in the room. I'm looking around, startled at what the hell I just saw. As I'm scanning the room, I see a black hand come from the wall or the floor directly in front of the door. It had a piece of paper on the floor, so I figured it just blew up and saw the shadow. So I returned to do my makeup. I take some pictures, take it off, and sit back down on my bed, which is across from my desk in the corner of the room. Then I noticed the paper moved in time, but it didn't explain what I saw standing in the middle of the room. Now for the latest thing. I have a weird sleeping schedule, as I'm unemployed and not going to school. Yesterday I woke up at 2 a.m. My dad left for work at 4 a.m. as always, and my mum went to bed around 3 a.m, so I had the house to myself. I woke up, had some leftovers, got something out of the cabinet but left it open because I knew I had to put the thing back, so what's the point? Everything is squeaky, even the cabinets, and I'm standing at the microwave, ironically right next to the coffee machine, and turn around to put it back, and the cabinet is now shut. Now I know I have a bad memory, but I never close them. I don't unless they're low to the ground where my cats can get in. So how did it close? And I would have heard it if I'd have closed it. While I'm eating, my mum screams for me and sounds absolutely terrified. I thought she got mad at me because I accidentally woke her up, so I yelled back, "What?" She says she heard a noise in her room. So I just left my room, and my mum said something in the bathroom scared our young cat Ivy, and she came running out of the bathroom, so that's great. I hate the bathroom, stuff always happens there. She yells at me, and she doesn't respond. So I open my door and see my mum sitting up in her bed, sobbing. She says she heard a female voice, and it sounded like it was at the foot of her bed. I assume someone broke into our house. I go into her room, shut the door, leaving it a crack open, grab her phone and ask if we should call the police. She says no, so I check the house. I knew I had let the dogs out earlier, but I was certain I locked the doors after letting them back in. I turned on the flashlight on her phone and walked around, checking the front and back door, and they were both locked. I didn't bother checking the window, because our house is pretty impossible to break into, so I knew no one else was in our house. She's still sobbing when I get back to her room. She says that it was feminine, but didn't sound like words, just mumbling. 2 syllables. All of my family members have 2-syllable word names, so it might have been a name. I asked her about sleep paralysis, and she said that she could move and the voice sounded clear. I told her about the cabinet, because I remember it happened literally less than an hour before. She didn't say anything about it. She didn't go back to bed until my dad got home at 2 p.m. Bounce and Zoe were laying on the floor in front of the bed, and didn't react to anything at all. Amber was laying next to my mum, and was asleep when I was talking to her. Katniss and Ivy were laying on the couch in the living room, and none of them reacted either. I don't know if she saw anything, but there have been some things there, but my mum is pretty blind without her glasses. She has bifocals and it was dark, but this is really starting to freak me out. My cats just sit and stare at the corner of the living room that just happens to connect to my mum's room. I thought for the longest time it was the old man next door. The shadow person that I saw didn't feel feminine, but it didn't also feel threatening. I've woken up with bruises in random spots, and while I do move around a lot, my mum would hear it if I hit a wall, and I have no clue what to do. This, along with a lot of the stuff that happened with my friend in the forest that's around our neighborhood, is really getting to me. I don't even wholly believe in this, but what else could it be? How do you imagine a sound? We're not even close to being religious. And I'm not really looking for tips, I just needed to share this with someone who had believed me. When I told my parents about the shadow person, they straight up laughed. I can't even imagine what my dad will say to my mum. And I saw her crying. She looked so scared. She called me because she thought someone might be in our house. Like that's how sure she is she heard it. I'm honestly so sick of this house. I just want to leave it and this town behind. When I was 8 years old, my mother and stepfather decided that they were going to move to northern Arkansas for them to have better job opportunities. It just so happened that they chose to buy a house that was about an acre away through open fields from a late 1800s to early 1900s cemetery. There was an old abandoned hand-built church that stood on the property that was no longer in use, and me and some of the neighborhood kids used to go and play in there. Nothing unusual had ever happened or given me the spooks until my 9th birthday. My mum made me invite all of the girls in my class at school to my sleepover party, and after we were done doing presents and everything, she told all of us to go outside and play. So the first thing I wanted to do was take all of my friends over to the church house to show them around. One of the girls that was sort of a loner anyway left the group and went weaseling through the actual cemetery, which was something that my mum had told me never to do. So the girl and I wound up getting into an argument, and she decided to go stomping on the graves and be disrespectful to the dead. I went and tattled, of course, so my mum made us come inside as it was getting close to dark. We all got ready for bed, and we were getting settled down in my bedroom when all of a sudden the door slammed shut by itself, which freaked all of us out and made us scream. So my mum came barging through the door to see what happened and told us all to calm down, blamed it on the air conditioning, and said we needed to get laid down. After a few moments of her walking away, we all got nestled in, but hadn't turned the lights off yet, when the doors slammed shut by themselves again, and it started rattling and vibrating on its hinges. My mum came bursting through to see which one of us was causing the ruckus, but we all told her what happened again, and she still didn't believe us. So she shut off the light and left the door open. Mind you, I was deathly afraid of the dark, and since the other girls were there and couldn't sleep with a nightlight on, my mum wouldn't let me use mine. So when the door slammed shut a third time, and the room was once again thrown into complete darkness, I went absolutely berserk with sobs and panic. At that point, my mum was getting downright pissed off because she thought that it was us. She opened the door, pulled me out of bed, told the girls that they had better get quiet before she had to start calling parents, and she made me go to sleep on the couch in the pitch darkness while I cried into my pillow where no one could hear me. I had gotten used to this, since my mum always treated my night terrors with little to no empathy. The next thing I know, I feel something pull my covers down a little, so I get stiff as a board, and peeped my head up, just in time to see this black, hairy-looking fog thing slithering back down the couch towards another, bigger, black, hairy-looking fog thing that was connected to it, that was resting on top of the entertainment center. I was frozen in shock. At this point, I couldn't make a sound until this thing had gotten halfway across the living room and was almost to the couch. Then I finally let out a blood-curdling screech. My stepdad finally came in this time, and when he flipped on the lights, the fog thing vanished. I was hyperventilating, so he told me to come and get into bed with them. I finally calmed down, went to sleep, and everything was fine for the rest of the night. Fast forward to the next night, everyone had gone home and it was back to the normal routine, so that I could get ready for school the next day. When I laid down, I felt like something was watching me, so I insisted that my mum let me use my nightlight, but she wouldn't budge on the issue, and finally agreed to leave the hallway light on with my door cracked instead. I did my little whimpering like usual until I was finally drifting off and saw this fog thing coming towards me again, but I was too tired to wake myself back up. The dream that I had that night was one of the scariest things I've ever dreamt of in my life, and it became a reoccurring dream for the next few months. I always woke up in a sweat and jolting myself from my bed to run to my parents' room. One night where the dream finally ended with me being ripped to shreds by these three little demon-looking things, which hadn't happened any of the other nights, I never had that dream again. But I also have only had a handful of dreams ever since. It's like my mind decided to shut itself off from the traumatic experiences the dreams were giving me. That, or the entity decided to start hijacking my dreams from me. I'm not really sure. My belongings apport and reappear in the most random, obvious places, specifically keys, not just mine but others as well. There are always weird noises in every house that I move to. People that I live with have witnessed it. I've got pictures of it too. It throws things sometimes when it wants my attention, and it gets stronger the longer I live in one place. It's like if I move to a new house, it weakens the entity for a while, but it always manages to gain strength as it gets comfortable. It never really has done anything to harm me or anyone else per se, but it's always lurking, making its existence known, and gives everyone in my house the creeps. I've tried doing cleansing and prayers and all the spiritualistic stuff that most people advise, but those things don't even faze it in the slightest. What's even weirder is the fact that when I get very upset or angry, things fall off shelves or even fly towards me, like Matilda. And I've even blown lights out just by touching the switch when I'm in one of these moods. My hair constantly stays full of static. So much so that I literally have to use spray that you can iron your clothes with to keep my hair from sticking to my face. And orbs are starting to make themselves visible on a regular basis inside my home. Is it possible that something is manifesting by the suppression of my fears or something? The spiritual energy on my property is so intense I literally don't know how to explain it to people without sounding like I've lost all my marbles. I've done plenty of research over the years into possibilities, but have come up empty-handed every single time. Any information or insight would be appreciated more than you can understand. This happened when I was 8 years old. I woke up one night to go to the bathroom when I heard my mother argue in her bedroom. It's worth noting that my mother was quite unwell, and we knew that eventually the sickness would claim her. However, at no point did it affect her mind. She was arguing in her bedroom, and it caught my attention because she sounded rather upset. "No, I don't want to go," she kept on saying in an angry tone. I tiptoed in to see who she was talking to, but when I observed, there was no one there. She was talking to the wall. Eventually, just being a child and a bit tired, I returned to bed, and the next morning I spoke to her normally. Like I said, her mind was unaffected by the illness. And then I gave her a kiss goodbye for the day. A few hours later, she had passed on. I still remember the look in her eyes when she waved at me through the doorway, which she never did normally. She knew that she would never see me again. Have you ever grabbed your camera or phone to try and capture something that you could not see but felt? While looking through them, you discover that you were right on the money. There was something that showed up that you didn't or couldn't see with your eyes, or you were taking pictures of an event, or with family and friends, with no funny creepy vibes. When you find out that feeling, was your gut telling you that something was off or not right or just weird? It makes you question all the times that you felt that feeling, and wonder if they were an indication that there was something there unseen by your eyes. This is an experience I had when I was 27. In late September of 1996, I stayed with a friend. Her baby girl and my baby boy were born one day apart in June. She and I had been friends for 8 years. We had many mutual friends, and I had been to her house many times since high school, which had been her late parents' house and her childhood home. Her mum had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia young, in her early 40s, when we were in high school. Her dad kept her home until he could no longer care for her by himself, and she had 2 older brothers. The eldest moved out to go to college, then her elder brother was rarely home. When her mum passed away, shortly after my friend got married. The house went to her and her new husband. They updated it, moved in, had their daughter. Her husband worked for a coal mine and it was pretty far away and too far to commute back and forth home early every morning. So he got 1 3-day weekend off a month and then back to work. So it was just her and her daughter most of the time. She invited me and my son to stay over one night and I happily accepted. I was a single mum. My son's father passed away before he was born and he never saw him. I lived with my mum and her husband and was looking forward to a change of scenery and thought it would be good for my mum to have some time with him alone. We had a great time. Both babies were so cute and were both good-natured. She took lots of pictures of us all. We chatted and played with them, fed them, bathed them and put them to bed. We visited some places, and when she said she was tired and going to bed, I wanted to wind down for a little bit, so I stayed up a bit longer. After she went to her room, I checked on my son. I went to the living room and sat on the couch. I sat there alone, in the quiet. I had this funny, creepy feeling that I was being watched and got goosebumps. I told myself that I was being silly, and that I was tired from lack of regular sleep. I shrugged it off and got up and ready to go to bed. We all slept through the night. The next morning we hung out and I stayed until about 4 p.m. It was nice. Before I left, she said we should take the pictures to be developed and would get 2 copies made and would let me know when she got them back. 2 weeks later, she called and said she had them and if I wanted to come by and get them. Then she said that she wanted to show me something in a few of the pictures and would not elaborate further, just that she and her husband wanted my opinion. I said I'd be there shortly. My mum let me leave my son with her. When I got there, I didn't pick up on anything until she opened the envelope from the picture developer. We were looking through them, and they were so good. Then before she got to the last, she paused and told me that there was something in these pictures they couldn't figure out. I was curious. She seemed a bit hesitant and showed me the first of a series of 3 pictures she had saved for last. They had been taken one after another. I was sitting on her couch holding her daughter, and she pointed out that there was something strange to the left-hand side of us. I looked at the picture and saw what I thought was a slight white blur to the right of us, a little about my shoulder. At first I thought her daughter or I moved slightly as she was taking it, or she moved it as she was taking it. She then showed me the next one. It was something that looked like a white transparent smoke or mist, and it was bigger than in the first picture. I squinted at it and tried to think about what it could be. We didn't smoke. No candles burning, no mist vaporizer. I then watched her pick up the last picture. My eyes widened when I saw what looked like something sitting on the couch beside us. It reminded me of ectoplasm from the movie Ghostbusters. It looked like an apparition was forming. It was milky white and translucent. It looked like it had a head with a skull-like face. It seemed like it was leaning in towards us with an arm that could have been a hand up to the side of the face, like it was resting its cheek against its hand, curled so the knuckle held it up, with the elbow sitting flat on a table, sitting and gazing at us. A head with a shoulder, its arm bent at the elbow, resting his chin on the bald hand. There was a bit of what looked like its upper torso. It looked like it had tried to form more but stopped at that point. It was facing us, the left side of its face to the camera. Its profile slightly turned, showing the right eye socket. I was stunned. Chills covered my body. My mind was trying to register this. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Her husband came into the kitchen, greeted me and saw my expression. They both felt the same way. We tried to come up with a plausible and rational explanation but could not. Then I remembered how I felt that night and told them about it. They were looking at me with looks of wide-eyed incredulity, but believed me. It showed up on their negatives too. I asked them if they ever felt that way. They both said they hadn't. Of course, he wasn't there a lot since they moved in, and this was her family home, and she felt comfortable there. It did not feel sinister, and it didn't last very long. It wasn't a black mass, it was white. I later found out she showed her older brothers copies of the pictures, and they had the same reaction. She asked them if they ever felt anything, watched them, or had any strange experience. Her brother, the middle child, said there was a ghost in the house and he saw it when he was a kid. I forget what else she found or if he elaborated more on it. If it had been evil or negative, I'm not sure if he would have told her. I'm not sure if he wouldn't tell her more to not freak her out, other than what she saw, and she was surprised by this. She never had experienced anything like this, nor had the elder brother. Of course, she was a bit unnerved. I've never had this happen to me before or since.
Sometimes I'll have things taken from me. No matter how hard I look, I'll never be able to locate them again. Let me take you back. When I was a student, I lost a tiger's eye necklace in school. I looked all over campus, but it was gone. When I went home, I combed my room from top to bottom. Nothing. And months passed, and one day I dream about a tree spirit in the middle of a garden. It told me to put my hand inside its trunk to retrieve my necklace, and when I did, I woke up. Next thing I know, my necklace was right beside my pillow. Do you think I looked on my bed for all those months? Of course I did. It certainly wasn't there before I went to bed. Another time I lost my grandfather's Swiss Army knife. He passed away several years ago, and when I wasn't hiking, I always kept it safe in a drawer. Then one day it just vanished. I checked every nook and corner of my room. I even checked my hiking bags in case I forgot to take it out. This morning I dreamt I found it in front of my grandparents' house. When I checked, it was on the desk. I don't get it. Is it some kind of borrowing poltergeist? I'm pretty sure I didn't misplace it because I'm usually very organized, and it's almost as if it vanishes and reappears for no apparent reason.
It happened back in 2008. I was a junior in high school hanging out with an old girlfriend of mine and her friend at my house, while the rest of my family flew out to Washington to visit family the previous night. The night was any typical teenager hangout. We ordered Pizza Hut, played Guitar Hero, and played some homemade spirit games, things with fire. You light the fire and ask the ghost a question. If the fire moves, it means whatever. Anyway, profoundly normal things. For reference, we were all hanging out in the attic, which at the time was my bedroom. The staircase led right under the living room, which has a bead door at the bottom. You can usually hear someone coming through them to get up, but this shook all of us to our core. We were well and done playing ghost games and playing Guitar Hero, when out of nowhere during a break, a blood-curdling scream from a woman shrieked from the bottom of the stairs. It almost sounded fake, like a corny movie scream, but loud and panicked for sure. We froze and heard nothing else, no beads, no footsteps, nothing. My house was old, so you often heard and felt people moving around in it, but there was nothing. I got the courage to charge the living room with a pocket knife after yelling that we were calling the cops. But to our surprise, there was nothing. The doors and windows were locked. It was the middle of a particularly nasty Michigan snowstorm, so there weren't even footprints outside the house. We all ran outside and went to the end of the short driveway, looking in the window from afar for an intruder. We called the police and they came and searched the entire house for us while we sat in my 90s Pontiac Grand Prix. After an hour, they came back and found no one. After this, I ran into the house, grabbed my essentials and drove to my best friend's house, and ended up crashing at his place for 3 months after that. I refused to sleep in the house until my family had returned from Washington. To this day, I have no clue what it was, but it sends shivers down my spine thinking about that scream, even as an adult. Nothing else ever happened at the house, and nothing really happened before either. It was random as hell. I had just moved to Laughlin, Nevada, to work in a casino. I got an apartment not far away. Everything was going well when one night, on the crap table, a box man I hadn't worked with yet came and sat box. I literally was instantly in love, with a crazy, indescribable attraction. He spoke to me, but mostly turned his chair toward third base. I was on second base. He was supposed to watch the whole table. This went on for weeks. I'd catch him looking at me from other pits. One night, all the dealers were up in the bar after everything, so I went too. We talked that night till daybreak. He said the moment he walked up to the table, the first time he saw me, the attraction was so intense it practically made him fall into the box chair. He couldn't look my way, or he couldn't do his job at all. We started dating. Eventually he came to my apartment, where I said I had some strange things happening with the lights going on. My stepdad had died a few years before and I'd say, "Bob, please turn the lights back on," and on they would pop. I always assumed it was my stepdad checking on me, being so far from home and family. So we were done with dinner, having wine and getting loose, and I start telling my new boyfriend about the light thing. He says he doesn't believe in that kind of thing. Well, I then say out loud, "Hey Bob, can you turn..." Bam, the lights come back on. I swear it almost ruined the date. We moved in together because we slept together that night, and I on the pill got pregnant first time. A few months later, he buys a house for all of us. Now the new house, Bob has a new trick. He likes to turn the channel to a completely random one, a lot. One day, going through my boyfriend's stuff he had in his storage, he shows me his family genealogy book. I say, "Ooh," and grab it. Well, his family is all from the exact town in Canada that my dad was born, with tons of family still there. Some of my boyfriend's sister and brothers went to the school with my family members. This leads to a discussion about how it always felt like we were being pushed together. And getting pregnant like that felt like someone wanted to make sure we didn't miss the cues about our destiny. He had moved from Canada to Laughlin, and I came from Washington to Laughlin to find him. After the baby was born, we would see a figure walking down the hall to check on the baby. We've moved to a few states since then, but there's still occasionally things going on, like a figure in the hallway, but more so with our kid. She's 22 now, Bob still checks in on me, and now he checks in on the daughter. That's our ghostly love story. My first experience was working in a haunted hotel. I was taking pictures on the 12th floor attic area when I got the sensation that I should not be doing that. As I walked down the stairs, a little voice in the back of my head told me to be careful. Later that day, I was pulling a big laundry cart through a doorway when somehow my little finger got caught between it and the doorframe. I had to wear a splint for a few weeks. I apologized to whatever it was and took care not to record videos or pictures. The second time was a little more my fault and I paid for it. I was feeling like something was messing with me, and I told it to not be a little prick. I kept getting things thrown or knocked over my table as I was working that day, and I realized what I had said and apologized. The third time wasn't intentional on my part. I was having a rough day because the previous shift dropped the ball on the job. I made a comment to myself about whatever was there messing with them. It didn't take it too kindly that I insulted it. I went down to the break room to check something on the computer, and as I was going to sit down, it felt like the chair was just rolled out from under me, just enough for me to slip and fall on my ass. I was okay, quickly righted myself, and muttered that I wasn't being serious but apologized again. Try and take heed from my stories. When you're in a paranormal location or something similar, be respectful and open-minded to what may be watching you that you can't see. As a child, I'd spend weekends at my dad's house, which was old and said to be haunted by a playful girl called Esther. For other people, doors would shut themselves, lights would turn on and off, and doorbells would ring in the middle of the night. My siblings would even have conversations with Esther. Understanding this as a 6-year-old absolutely terrified me. Pretty soon I had my own experiences, but they were less friendly. I'd hear breathing in the dark. I'd stop breathing to listen, and it was much closer to me than my stepbrother in the bunk above. I'd wake up to see the imprint of someone sitting on my bed. Reading other stories of sleep paralysis sounds familiar to mine, but one night, I challenged my night terror. I had 2 die-cast race cars on my dresser. Both hoods opened of the car, but one didn't stay up very well. I said out loud, "If you're here, shut the hood when I go to bed," and opened the hood of the car that had the better functioning hood. I stared at it to make sure that it was up and stayed up. I hit the lights, and as soon as I did so, I heard slam. I turned the lights on and the hood was closed. I ran downstairs and my stepmother said I looked as white as a sheet, like I'd seen a ghost. She and my dad checked it out and came to the conclusion that it must have just shut by itself. The weirdness continued until the day we moved out, but I still have trouble believing it myself, or typing it out for that matter, and still get chills just remembering it. It was late Sunday evening around 9 p.m. I was in my room just playing video games like usual, until I heard the shower turn on. The bathroom was right beside my room, and the door requires some slamming to be shut properly. I didn't hear the door being slammed, but disregarded it as my own lack of attention to it, since I was fully immersed in my video game. About an hour later, my game was finished, but I noticed that the shower was still on for some reason. Now I, for one, take long showers too, usually around 40 minutes or so, but no one else in the family usually takes that long. So I asked my dad if my aunt was home, because my parents and brother were all downstairs in the living room. No one else could have been there besides my aunt. However, my dad said my aunt hadn't come home yet. I told my dad that someone was in the bathroom taking a shower. He went to check, and the lights were still on, but the shower was now off. We knock on the door. Once, twice, no answer. He opens the door and there's no one there, not a single soul. My dad thought I was pranking him, but I told him I wasn't. He still doesn't believe me. Who was there? How did the shower turn on? Why were the lights still on with a closed door? I'll never know the answer to these questions, but to make it even creepier, I dreamt about a dark figure with glowing eyes standing at the top of the staircase that is on the same floor as the bathroom, and the room beside mine always has a slight cool breeze circulating in there.
We lived in a compound that was a group of homes surrounded by one big fence, and all that lived there were my family and cousins and stuff. Anyway, one day my mum asks me to deliver a pan that we borrowed from my aunt. It's about 5 or 6 p.m. and it's already dark. When I got to my aunt's house, I opened the door and shout, "Hey tita," but no one replied. I said it about 3 times over when suddenly the doors and windows start to open and close violently. I try to get out the house, but it's locked, and when I finally opened it, my cousin next door says that no one's home and that she's shocked I'm able to enter the house. But when we try to open the door again, it appeared to be locked. I then later learnt that the house is a bit haunted. There's apparently the spirit of a little girl on that house that's not evil, just playful, and was allegedly playing with me.
Every single time I walk by my sisters in my room, I saw 2 people. A small young boy, a taller but still young girl about the same height as me, and I was 8. The boy looked about 3 or 4. I thought it was creepy, but that I was just seeing things. The kids were intrusive though, because when me and my mum were picking up my sister, they were appearing on the rooftops. This story is different, however, because my mum did believe me. One day, they just disappeared. When I was 14 to 15, I came home a little tipsy. My room was on the top floor of our house, and I went straight to bed. While lying down, I heard someone trying to get someone's attention. The sound was, "Psst, psst." We've been living here for the longest time, but I remember there were stories of maids being murdered by the previous owners before, but everyone thought it was just old wives' tales, so I really didn't pay too much heed to it. I tried to ignore it and realized it's getting a little louder. Since I was a little inebriated, I found the courage to call out, "If you're really a ghost, then prove it." I then felt a slap inside my right thigh, which made me immediately sit up straight. I stood up and reached for the light and looked inside my room, but no one was there. I pulled down my pants and noticed a red, welt-shaped hand forming with the fingers pointing towards my gonads, so the slap seemed like it was made by someone sitting at the end of the bed. Needless to say, I bunked with my brother for a few months after that.
My dad has an antique World War II radio from his father, and an old grandfather clock from him too. In high school, I was home alone by myself doing homework in the kitchen. I had headphones in, but took them out to go to the bathroom. In the next room over, I could hear a radio talking about the attack on Pearl Harbor, as if it were happening in real time. I walked in the dining room, and that radio was playing. It wasn't plugged in and hadn't been since I could ever remember, and didn't have batteries. Then a year or 2 later, my mother and I prayed before dinner. As soon as she finished her prayer, we both said amen. And as soon as we did, the clock started to chime as if it were midnight. His grandfather clock had not been wound up in at least 10 years at this point. The 2 strangest and most inexplicable things I've ever been a part of.
Some kids in my primary school did the Charlie game, and a girl's desk flipped over. I remember it being really weird because we had those metal desks that only seat 1. If they were pushed, the desks landed on their side. But when the girl's desk was flipped, it landed on its top. I think we all ran out screaming after that, and we had to get the school blessed. There was also a lot of worry about the demon sticking to someone, i.e. the girls whose desk flipped over. There were a lot of conflicting reports over how to get rid of a demon. Some people said you had to read the entire Bible, others said you had to burn the paper you played the game on. Some of those primary school friends ended up in secondary school with me. They validated what we saw at the same day. It's part of the reason why I never toy around with stuff like Ouija boards or summoning spirits. No thank you. A priest once told me he went to a house because it was infested. As soon as he entered, he was greeted by the owner of the apartment, who immediately started to tell him about the presence. She said it was a child spirit who would sometimes either scare her or, when she was asleep, hug her legs. As a confirm, shortly after she had ended her narration, they heard the door moving. There was no one inside the apartment but them. The priest called his superiors, and they came over in an attempt to banish whatever was there, trying to use holy water on the bedroom wall, and allegedly, the pictures hung on the wall moved as they did so, in order to avoid contact with the liquid. When everything was finished, the priest went on to investigate the situation, and allegedly, after some time, discovered that a satanic rite was made in this area before the construction of the building. I always suspected my place of being haunted. One day when I was home, my phone kept falling on the floor. Whenever I walked out of the room, I would hear a thump, and it would be my phone in the middle of the room. This happened about 3 times during the day. Right before I went to bed, I put my phone on my nightstand, and as I was walking out of the room, I heard a bang on the wall. I walked out of the room, and my phone was once again on the floor. I picked up my phone and put it back on my nightstand and said out loud, "If someone's here, push my phone on the floor again." I literally watched my phone slide across my nightstand and fall to the floor. I was completely shaken, so I put my phone back on the nightstand and asked it to push it off again, and it happened again. If rent wasn't so damn cheap, I would be out of there. I was at work one day, and me and my colleague went for a cigarette. When we came back, we had a few minutes left and decided to take the elevator to the canteen. All the way down the hall, there was a woman walking about 10 feet ahead of us. The lift door opened. Anyway, this lady walks into the lift but does not turn around, and the lift doors start to close. At this point, wanting to get into that lift to not let any further time pass, I run up to the button and pressed it in order for the lift doors to open before it starts going down. They begin to open again. And when the lift doors are fully open, my colleague and I walk in, and the lady was gone. We got to it before the doors closed fully, and there's nowhere she could have gone, in broad daylight. I decided not to work evenings there anymore after this creepy occurrence. There is this curious thing in my childhood home. My family call it the empty spot. You see, when you walk over to it, you get a sensation in your stomach like you're falling. That's the best way I can describe it. But there's another aspect to it too, one which many people will find unbelievable. And I respect that. I would be skeptical too. But it happened. You see, this one time, me and my dad and my brother were getting some coffee, and my dad dropped his phone. We all heard it hit the floor, but the phone was gone. It had vanished. It would not ring if we called it or anything. It was a very bizarre thing. Dad obviously wasn't happy and had to get a new phone. But a few years after that, me and my brother were hanging out and heard something hit the floor. Curious, we went over to see what it was and were flabbergasted where right there on the ground in the empty spot was Dad's phone, just as if it had been dropped moments ago. But this is years in the future now. We look at each other in fascination and horror. How the hell did this even happen? It's honestly one of the weirdest things I've ever heard of, and wish to know what exactly causes it. When I was 18, my boyfriend at the time picked me up and said we were going to see a house he's interested in renting before grabbing lunch. His mum was the real estate agent, so she was going to meet us there. Cool, no problem. We pull up to the driveway, and that's when I start to feel a bit sick. I was totally fine before, so I figured the sensation would pass. As we're walking up to the door, his mum must have seen us because she came out to say hello. We walked back inside, and they stood there talking in the foyer area. Me? I went right to the master bedroom and stared at a corner between the bed and the bathroom, and I felt insanely nauseous at this point, and I told myself I found a bathroom because I felt sick, nothing spooky. My boyfriend came in and asked me what was up. All of a sudden I started spouting that Gertrude had died in the house of a heart attack, and I felt like she was still here. He started laughing and said that I can just say I don't like the house, and I told him I wasn't kidding and to ask his mum. It's probably worth mentioning at this point, I've always had a bit of an empathic side, but my family tried to tell me we have a special intuition, and I didn't believe it until right now. I stayed frozen in that bedroom while he went to ask. In hushed tone, I hear him ask, and his mum responds, "What? How did she know that?" Yes, a woman named Gertrude died recently. She was 87 and had a heart attack in the home. My legs gave out and I hit the floor. I don't have the address for this place, didn't do any research on it, and I don't know who lived there. There was no explanation for what happened, other than something paranormal. Before I begin, I want to give a bit of context. This was about 7 years ago, and my boyfriend at the time and I had just gotten back together after a brief separation. Jerry's brother had gotten married and bought a house, so Jerry and I agreed to stay in the home to clean it while they returned. Looking back, that's a little bit weird to me, but whatever, I was happy to help. One night while we were staying in the home, Jerry and I were unpacking and washing dishes. Jerry wanted to celebrate the fact that we had gotten together, so he left me to grab some ingredients to cook me dinner. While he was gone, I put Pandora on and kept washing dishes. The phone I used at the time had a speaker on the back, so I left my phone on the couch face down playing music. It's important to note that my phone had about 15% battery left. After about 15 minutes or so, the music cut off. I figured my battery had died, so I kept on washing the dishes. However, I couldn't ignore the eerie feeling that filled the home when there wasn't any sound. I quickly finished washing the dishes as quickly as I could and walked over to my phone. When I turned it over, I was shocked to see that my phone hadn't died. It had about 10% battery left. Pandora was still on and the volume was still up. I sat on the couch and began messing around with it, trying to get the music to play again, but nothing worked. Now, it's important to note the layout of the house. As I'm sitting on the couch, I'm facing the kitchen. The front door and dining room are to my left, and there's an archway to the hallway to my right. If you were to stand in the archway to the hall, there'd be a bathroom in front of you, a bedroom with windows to your right, and a bedroom with no windows to your left. As I'm on the couch messing with my phone, I see a shadow pass by the archway super quickly, almost as quickly as a blink of an eye. What do? What every first victim of a movie serial killer does. I follow it. My brain registers the figure as a woman with a long dress and long black hair, but I couldn't see her face. I followed her down the hallway, of course, into the dark bedroom with no windows. The only thing in this room was a closet with older metal accordion doors which were slightly open. When I stepped into the doorway of this room, I froze. I couldn't move or speak. She stood in the corner of the room opposite me, and we stood there frozen. It felt like I was there for an hour, but it was only a few seconds. Almost immediately after I walked into the room, Jerry came back. When he didn't see me in the kitchen or living room, he yelled out, "Babe?" But when I didn't answer, he yelled out again, "Babe, baby." As much as I wanted to scream back, I couldn't. All of a sudden, the accordion door started shaking. She started screaming and coming towards me. In my head, I'm screaming and trying to do anything I can to get myself to move. When I'm finally sure this is how it ends, I get plucked off the ground and am popped over Jerry's shoulder. Next thing I know, he sets me down on the couch and asks me, "Why did you follow her? You know not to follow them. Why did you follow her?" Jerry happened to have some sage spray, Again, now thinking back on this all weird, how did he know about her? After we lit a few candles, the eerie feeling went away, and nothing else happened. But that is something I will never forget. I've seen something similar after that, like years after, but I wasn't with Jerry, or even in the same house. I truly wonder what it was I experienced that night.
I am what is considered to be a very ordinary man in my early 30s. I have a stable job. I am in a happy and solid relationship, and I enjoy traveling, eating out, gaming, hiking, and culture. But my entire life I have experienced something which I have called life bleeding. I have really struggled to find anything similar online, so decided to put the sensation out there to open the world to see if anyone else has ever experienced anything like this. It's a very broad yet subtle sense of memory and emotion. Every now and then, it could be minutes apart, weeks, months, or maybe even years, I get the sensation out of nowhere that I'm living another life. This could be happening perhaps in a parallel to mine or in the past, but I've never had the sense of anything happening in the future. The feeling itself is super hazy. I'm fully aware and in control of everything I'm doing in the present by myself, but my mind and memories for a brief moment open up. The most similar sensation I can describe it is like deja vu, but I'm experiencing something from a different place's perspective, and from a different being. That's either happening now or has happened. The events themselves are mostly mundane. It could be someone driving somewhere, eating a meal, or having a conversation. But I've had occurrences where I experienced traumas such as bereavements or physical harm. I want to clarify, this isn't just me thinking and imagining these things. It always feels so distant in my mind, and it's a struggle to bring them into closer view. It's just something I've had with me for as long as I can remember, where for a second or two, my life is bleeding into someone else's, and vice versa. I'd love to know if anyone else has ever experienced anything as strange as this.
I grew up in a farmhouse that was built in 1898 that had a chimney. For some reason, I was looking into the chimney and saw a bag-looking thing. So I reached in to grab it, and when I did, something grabbed me. I ended up with bruises all the way around my wrist, and there were teeth in this small burlap bag. The second thing was me and a friend were out hunting on one of his dad's fields. This particular field was completely surrounded by woods, and he was on one side and I was on the other, both of us looking towards the end of the field where we had spotted deer. Something that had predator-like camo, making no sound or anything, hovered in the middle of the field between us. It looked like a constant heat wave distorting the fog, and maybe it was because it caused a lot of moisture in the air that the area to condense into droplets you could hear hitting the crops. I don't know what it was because I don't believe in UFOs. I honestly can't grasp the size or shape of the object, but it seemed like something was just there, barely beyond our perception. This past weekend, my parents had an experience. I did not make much of it, and neither did the rest of my family. This parent got up in the morning for work. However, they were washing some dishes from the night before. I woke up and was able to hear them wash the dishes and everything. No one else in the home was awake besides one of our pets. My parents came into the room and asked for my sibling. I mentioned that they were asleep upstairs. We have a single room upstairs, somewhat like an attic but used as a bedroom, which houses my other sibling. At this point, my parent told me to swear that my sibling was upstairs, and I explained that yes, they were, as I had not seen them come down. My parent then said that they had seen my sibling run around the house and could feel the feet and items move as they ran. They were so sure that they walked over to peek around the couch to scare them while playing hide and seek. We did not discuss this further. However, more recently I have also seen the same sibling at home despite everyone being away. The sibling is still in grade school, so they wake up and are taken to school by one of my parents. I was also getting ready to leave for work, and as I was heading out of the bathroom, our cat ran and hid behind the bed. He's a kitten, so he's very playful. The hiding is not suspicious, to me at least, as he'd been running around and playing by himself throughout the morning. I was leaving from the bathroom and heading towards the bed to play with the cat. My bedroom door is in front of the door that leads to the dining room/common area. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw this sibling sitting on the dining table eating breakfast with only hair covering their face, and I even made out their clothes. As I went to play with the cat, it occurred to me to tell this sibling to stop playing with the cat and to hurry up, or they'd be late for school. As I walk out of my bedroom, I remember my parents had already left with them, and I was the only one in the house at the time. I used to have one of those sort of bunk beds that had a desk underneath. Now and then I'd be laying in the bed and hear this breathing behind me. I'd jump right the hell out of bed and run to my parents' room and sleep on the floor. My mum told me to not be silly and that ghosts don't breathe, which is a fair point. So another time I came out of my room and noticed that the loft hatch was open and some silhouette of a person was looking down from the loft. I thought it was one of my parents and thought nothing of it. I went downstairs and my dad was on the couch and my mum in the kitchen. That's when I get a weird feeling and walked back up the stairs to look up, and the loft hatch was now closed. I went out and took a long walk that day, thinking I must have been imagining things. It just feels so strange. About 3 months ago, I was on my way home from my second oldest son's house. It was late evening, but still daylight. The road that I was traveling was a state route 2 lane. The area is rural with a combination of cornfields and woods, with quite a few hilly areas. Traffic was fairly light. At one point, I come upon a fire truck blocking the roadway that was closed. So I turned around and, being familiar with the area, made my way around the closure and went on. I texted, let's just say someone that I knew, on the local sheriff's department and asked them what was going on with the road closure. Before he answered me back, I had an overwhelming feeling hit me that I should stick around in the area. There's a cemetery close to the area that I go to quite often and record videos and audio on, so that's where I began to go to. I then get a response. It was a fatal crash, car versus truck head-on, female passenger deceased, and she was from the area. After I pull into the cemetery, I get another message with 2 photos attached. I open the attachments, and it was as horrible as I imagined it. One photo was of a car totally destroyed, sheets still covering the driver compartment, and there were 2 firefighters in the photo. One standing at the driver door looking down into the car, and next to him the medical examiner, who was also looking down into the driver area. The second firefighter was standing on the passenger side of the door. He was staring down into the driver area. All 3 wore a somber look on their face. The look made you think that they are thinking to themselves, what a shame. Now in the background of this picture is what you'd expect to see. A fire truck, another emergency vehicle, and of course trees. Now I had been given the deceased driver's name because due to the career that I retired from, I had dealt with her on several occasions and knew that he had too dealt with her a few times. Now as I sat there in the cemetery looking at the picture, I kept getting that overwhelming feeling that I was missing something that was in the photo, and that inner voice, if you want to call it that, kept telling me to look again, to keep looking, and that's exactly what I did. I kept looking at it. Finally something said, enlarge it, zoom on the 2 at the driver's door. It was almost like something was begging me, longing me to keep looking. So that's what I did, and then it was like a hammer. Every hair on my body stood on end at once, and I gasped for breath because I became physically sick to my stomach. I knew this female, but it had been a few years since I dealt with her, but there was no denying it. In the photograph of the crash, just behind the two emergency service workers standing at the driver's door was the face of the deceased girl. I could not believe what I was looking at, and for me there was no denying that she was standing behind them, looking down into the driver's compartment. The look on her face was complete and total shock, like she was staring at her own body crumpled on the floorboard area, asking herself, why? What have I done? What about my daughter? I took a screenshot of the enlarged photo and showed it to the deputy. The following day, I went to see him and got the full story of what happened. Apparently, it took place before I showed him the screenshot, and the look on her face explained more so when I heard what led to the crash. I told him I wanted him to look at the enlarged version of the picture I sent, and when I held it up for him to see, his face instantly, without hesitation, went white. That's her. But that's not possible, she was dead when it was taken. Now I've shown the photo to a limited number of people out of privacy for her and her family, but everyone that has seen it have the same reaction. In the photograph, her appearance appeared younger, with her original hair color and style. Now I've had a job like this for 23 years, and I've seen a lot of death. I've had people, including children, pass away in my arms, and I've handled a lot of fatalities, but never have I had anything like this happen to me in all my years. My family has owned our property since around the time my mum was little, so that's around 42 years now. Growing up, there was this house on our property that was locked up tight and basically falling apart inside that we unfortunately didn't have the money to demolish yet. Inside, there wasn't really anything of value. There was a massive wasp nest that I swear was the size of a dumpster, and rats' nests everywhere. That locked up house had been on the property before my family purchased it, and a long while after. When we finally got the money to demolish it, I was around 10 or 11. My grandfather went inside a few times to clean it out a bit to see if there were any valuables in the rats' nests or stowed somewhere else. He hadn't bothered to check before. During one of his searches, he found an old locket. It was sort of old and had a unicorn and rainbow on the front. And he found a digital clock inside that was busted. Little kid me loved it and asked to have it, so he let me keep it. For the next few days that they took the house to be demolished, I had awful luck. My favorite action figure broke, my favorite SNES game lost all its data, until one night after the house was finally demolished, I had a vivid nightmare that some awful shadow woman monster appeared from where the house had once been, grabbed the locket off my neck, and went out the bedroom window, and took off in a swoosh of smoke. In the morning I couldn't find the locket at all, and needless to say I was extremely freaked out. I remembered it, and looked for it for about a week and a year, eventually deciding it was lost. That is until 23 years later I found it. I found it upstairs in the attic, where I knew I'd never been because I wasn't allowed to play there due to the splinters and it being very hot. I swear my heart stopped, and I got this eerie feeling from looking at it. But I also felt this tugging inside that wouldn't let me just leave it there, so I took it. My luck sucked for a solid week after I found it, but I'm still incapable of getting rid of it. I just hid it in a drawer and don't touch it, and I'm wondering if this pendant is cursed or something.
We rented a large house. Each evening my wife and I would take our daughter upstairs for a bath and put her to bed. I stayed downstairs, spending a couple of hours on my laptop before going upstairs myself. For 3 years, nothing unusual happened. Then one November evening, when my wife and daughter had retired upstairs, and I was on the laptop, the room went icy cold, and I began to shiver. I had a sensation that someone was standing right behind me, staring straight at the back of my head. For several minutes, I struggled to turn and looked behind me, but I was paralyzed. It remained like this for a few minutes, and then the temperature suddenly returned to normal and I could move. There was nothing behind me. I didn't mention anything to my wife about my experience. The same events then occurred for the next 3 evenings. Still, I said nothing. On the 4th evening, after my wife had gone upstairs, Instead of opening up my laptop, I sat on the sofa watching TV from this position. And from this position, I could view the entire living room. After a few moments, I became aware that there was a translucent figure of a young girl, aged around 6 or 7, with long blonde hair and dressed in night clothes. At first, I thought it was my daughter, but she has dark brown hair. The figure stood looking into the room for several minutes, then turned and walked down the hallway and vanished into the kitchen. The atmosphere was one of calm. I got up and followed her into the kitchen, but she had gone. I decided to go to bed, and still didn't say anything to my wife for fear of upsetting her. The next evening I was on the sofa, and once again the little girl appeared and stood silently just looking into the room. And once again she turned, walked down the hall and vanished. When I woke up the next morning, I decided I had to tell my wife, and began by saying that there was something I needed to talk to her about. Without any further prompting, she said to me, "Was it about the little girl?" Had she seen her too? Yes, often. I told her she could stay as long as she didn't cause a nuisance. I said that I thought her appearances were going to increase for some reason. My wife, who is quite religious, said she thought she would say some prayers to tell the little girl it would be okay for her to leave us. And after this, we never saw her again. There was also a strange ending to this story. About 6 months later, my work contract finished, and we were moving away from this house. I called the landlord, and he came over as we were leaving to settle up the paperwork and so forth. During our conversation with the landlord, he mentioned that we were his longest renters, and that most people left after a few months. I joked that it might be because his house was haunted, and related our story. The landlord then told us he had originally designed and built this house for his young family, but when their youngest daughter was 6, she had woken up one night and climbed over the stair railing and fallen to her death onto the stone floor below. The family was so distraught, they moved out and rented their home rather than selling it. The landlord said his wife had never set foot in the house for the next 15 years, right up until her death previous November. I reminded my wife that it was November when we first began seeing the little girl, and we now believed she had come in search of her mother. We felt that after saying prayers, we helped them to meet up and pass over to the other side. Before these events occurred to us, I was highly skeptical about the paranormal. My position was, show me proof. When my wife corroborated that I had seen and described exactly the same little girl, I was very careful not to prompt her in any way or try to influence her story. The complete similarities could not be explained by coincidence. Then when the landlord told us about his daughter, again without any hinting from us, it was yet another level of proof for me. 2 things stand out for me in this experience. One is that not only did I visually see the little girl, but I also was aware of her from some other internal sense that I'd never noticed before or experienced since. I think maybe we have a deeper unconscious feeling with which we can experience the paranormal. The second thing of interest was that despite being in the presence of an unworldly experience, it was not the slightest bit terrifying. In fact, the sense was of great calmness. I have to rethink my beliefs as a result of these experiences. I live in a very rural area. The neighbors to my right are a quarter of a mile away and are Mennonite. There are tons of farmland and hills between them and me. The neighbors across from me are older, quiet, and go to bed at about 7 p.m. And the neighbors to my left move out this weekend. I live in a house on a little under an acre of property. Our houses are pretty spaced out along the back road we live on, not a development, and we don't get many cars through here, mostly horse and buggies. The corn is high right now, so it dampens noise from other houses, but it's generally quiet around here. I have 2 kids of 2 and 9 weeks old, and their father lives in the house too. My 2-year-old has the first bedroom. My bedroom is next to hers, and the 9-week-old sleeps in my room. And their dad has the master bedroom across from my room. The 2-year-old's door is always shut when she's sleeping. but the rest of us keep our doors open at night. I've always had anxiety about people breaking into my house, which has never happened to me before, but too many scary movies and TV shows growing up will do that to you. I notice every noise at night. I have a direct view to the master bedroom from my room, and it's very obvious when he gets up to leave his room. At night, when everyone is settled in, I've been hearing noises in the walk-in basement, to the point where I have scurried from the living room to the master bedroom to ask their dad to check out the basement. When he goes down and checks, he doesn't ever see anything, but he always checks for peace of mind. Last night, I had probably the most heart-racing, body-shaking, in-fear experience. It was about 3 a.m, and I heard a car door shut outside, which is totally out of the norm, but I was like, okay, take a breath. I'm sure the neighbors just needed to get something from the car. So about 5 minutes later, I got up and peeked out the windows in my room, and I didn't see anyone or anything. I also would be able to see headlights shining through if a car was turned on at my neighbors driving down the road or in my driveway. And about 5 minutes after that, I heard noises coming from either the master bedroom or the basement, presumably the kid's father doing something. I got up and peeked into the master bedroom, and he was laying on the futon asleep. So I creeped down the hallway to the bathroom and peeked in to see if my 2-year-old had maybe wandered out of her room, but she hadn't. So I went back and sat on my bed. Then another 5 minutes go by, and I hear clattering in the sink, like metal on metal clattering. Sounded like someone was dropping utensils into it. So I jumped up, and my heart started pounding. I was watching the walls to see if I saw any shadows. I finally got the courage to scurry across the hall and woke up my kid's father. I told him what I'd heard, so he stumbled into the kitchen, me about 2 feet behind him. No one was there. So I went to examine the sink, and a dirty fork was sitting in it. I had just done the dishes after dessert, so the sink should have been empty, and I was the last person out the kitchen. I walked over to the basement door and saw it was cracked. I knew I shut it when I came up from doing laundry, so I asked the kid's father if he had left the door to the basement open. He said, yeah, I probably did that when I came back up. I'm pretty sure he was bluffing, because I don't think he went into the basement yesterday at all. So he moved our heavy iron-made kitchen chairs in front of the basement door and locked it. So then I checked out the rest of the house, the closets, pantries, bathrooms, and decided it must be in my head. So I sat back down in my room. Then I heard more noises. I heard footsteps coming up and down the basement. Then everything went quiet. I heard a bang on the wall from my daughter's room, which was her just flipping over in her sleep. A few times I heard more noises from the screen to my window, but when I looked out I saw nothing. Then around 5:15 a.m. I heard a car door shut again, which could have just been my neighbor leaving for work, but I didn't see anything when I looked out the window, and I heard no more noises. To sum it up, I heard a lot of noises and found a dirty fork in the sink. I didn't see anyone, and nothing was disturbed. We have 3 couches in the basement set up to relax on, my escape spot for the kids. So, is it possible someone is breaking through the basement door and somehow sleeping on the couches? I haven't been down there to check, as I'm still scared. We have a Ring doorbell on the front, but it's been dead for a while, so I'm charging it up tonight. It's more believable to me that it's paranormal activity than a squatter. This area is super safe, and I just don't know or see how or why anyone would be here or do anything in our home. Nothing was taken, but this isn't the first time. I've had plenty of nights like this.